Chapter 308. Leaving or staying sharpening the sword in the mirror, Zhang Chund hurried through the night and arrived at the foot of Rolling Python Mountain by daybreak. He jumped down from the saddle and threw the reins to a servant. He raised his head and looked at the majestic mountain, as if he could see through the layers of mountains to the fort on the mountain. This time, he received an urgent summon from his father, who asked him to return to the manor immediately. However, there were only a few words in the letter and no specific reason was mentioned. When he arrived at the boundary of Rolling Python Mountain, he vaguely heard that the family member that his father had lost contact with when he was young had come looking for him. This person was also a Taoist and was rumored to have some cultivation. He curled his lips. He had learned martial arts in Spirit Bridge Taoist Temple for many years, but he did not respect Taoists as much as ordinary people. His master was skilled in both martial arts and spells. In the eyes of ordinary people, those mysterious methods were nothing in his eyes. As long as he had a weapon in his hand, he would not be afraid of ghosts or evil spirits, and he would know how to break them. His body was strong and healthy. He climbed up the mountain path and arrived at the fort in the middle of the mountain after a short while. When the servants saw him, they were all delighted. There were even servants running inside, shouting, "Young mountain chieftain has returned to the mountain, young mountain chieftain has returned to the mountain." Not long after, someone came out and said, "Mountain master invites young mountain master inside." Zhang Chund nodded and walked in without looking sideways. When he arrived at the main hall, he saw a young Taoist and his father sitting there talking about something. However, after taking a glance, he was surprised and thought to himself, "Why is this person so young?" Although Zhang Zhan also had a rough understanding of qi cultivation, he only looked slightly younger. He could not help but have aged muscles and bones. Logically speaking, this uncle of his should be a few years older, but this person looked to be in his 20s. Although Spirit Bridge Taoist Palace had techniques to maintain one's youthfulness, it was impossible to achieve this. Zhang Chund thought to himself, could it be that he came up the mountain to swindle people? However, he immediately rejected this possibility. Not to mention that this person's appearance was extremely similar to Zhang Zhan's. Just from looking at them, he could tell that the two of them were from the same lineage. In his impression, his father was an extremely shrewd person, so how could he be fooled so easily? When Zhang Zhan heard the footsteps, he also saw his eldest son, and a look of joy appeared in his eyes. However, he had been in charge of the army for 20 years, and was the ruler of the border. He was a deep and steady person, and his words did not reveal much emotion. He said in a deep voice, "Chund, quickly come and greet your uncle." Although Zhang Chund had gone up the mountain to cultivate since he was young, and the father and son didn't spend much time together, he was extremely convinced of his father's abilities. He hurriedly came up to greet Zhang Yan, lifted his robe, and knelt down, saying, "Nephew Zhang Chund pays respect to eldest uncle." However, even though he seemed to be kneeling, his knees were actually still a hair's breadth off the ground. He relied on the strength of his toes to support his body, showing his impressive martial arts attainments. Zhang Yan naturally noticed Zhang Chund's actions, but he didn't care at all. He nodded slightly and said, "No need to be so courteous, get up." Zhang Zhan said, "Eldest brother, what do you think of this child?" Zhang Yan only needed one look to know that Zhang Chund was a person with great fortune, so he said, "This child needs some polishing, and he can inherit second brother's family business." When Zhang Zhan heard this evaluation, he was naturally happy. He was also knowledgeable. This elder brother of his had healed his body with a wave of his hand, and he was even better than before. Even if he didn't know how to cultivate, he could still feel the soft and boundless Tao Qi from his elder brother. It was deep and lofty, far superior to the Taoists in the temples that he usually saw. Thinking of this, he hesitated for a moment before asking, "I wonder how eldest brother's cultivation is compared to the Taoists in the Spirit Bridge Taoist Palace?" Zhang Yan smiled but didn't say anything. Zhang Zhan's eyes lit up, and he asked again, "Then how does eldest brother compare to the Taoists in the general's office?" This time, Zhang Yan spoke, but he didn't care. He said, "Those people are just ordinary people who only work for the sake of their salary. They can't be considered cultivators." Zhang Zhan stood up, cupped his hands, and asked, The imperial sorcerer of the imperial court has protected the country for 60 years. I wonder how eldest brother compares to him? Zhang Yan smiled. Even if there is a celestial technique, it can only help those who are fated with it. If one can't achieve immortality, it's all an illusion. Zhang Zhan's expression changed slightly and he cautiously said, eldest brother's Dao technique is profound, and even that Taoist who is far from being eldest brother's opponent. Since there's no one left in the house, why don't eldest brother stay here? I'll build a Taoist temple for eldest brother to worship. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. I came here because I coincidentally divined that you would have a calamity in your life, so I came here to save your life. As cultivators, we see the mortal world as fetters. Today, after we talk, we shall leave. From now on, immortals and mortals will be separated forever, and we will never meet again. Zhang Zhan still wanted to say something, but Zhang Yan smiled faintly, stood up, and walked out with a wave of his sleeves. Zhang Zhan was startled. The two brothers had been separated for many years, and now that they were reunited he still had many questions to ask, but he didn't expect Zhang Yan to leave without any hesitation. He subconsciously stretched out his hand, but as if he thought of something, he shook his head and put his hand down. Zhang Chund glanced at his father and said, "Father, I'll go get eldest uncle back." Before Zhang Zhan could say anything, he chased after him with light footsteps. He originally thought that he would be able to catch up to Zhang Yan in a few steps. However, even though the figure in front of him was walking neither fast nor slow and seemed to be taking a leisurely stroll, he just couldn't catch up to Zhang Yan even after a few steps. Instantly, he was extremely shocked. The place Zhang Yan was heading to was a cliff, and the distance between the two was getting farther and farther. Zhang Chund was anxious, and he shouted, "Eldest uncle, stop, it's a dead end ahead." Zhang Yan, however, turned a blind eye to it and continued walking forward. When he reached the edge of the cliff, he stepped on the void and walked a few more steps as if there was a real path under his feet. Just now, with a flap of his sleeves, his body transformed into a wisp of smoke, and he rose into the sky in an instant. A song came from the horizon, saying, "The cool breeze helps me ascend to the 9 heavens. This time I go among the floating clouds and weave the colors. I'm free and unfettered like an immortal, looking back in a dream, 1,000 years have passed." Seeing this scene, Zhang Chund was extremely shocked. He chased all the way to the top of the cliff, and he stared blankly at the wisp of cloud disappearing into the vast sky. Zhang Yan had only come here because he had accidentally discovered that Zhang Zhan's life was in danger, and that was why he had appeared to save him. Now that everything was over, he naturally didn't have the mood to stay in the mortal world. He immediately soared into the sky, and in less than half a day, he had already returned to the clear nether heavenly lake. He sat down on the jade couch again, summoned the mirror spirit, and said, "Go and call Yenny over." Just now, Lu Yenny had returned to the manor after killing the demons, and was teaching the Wang sisters how to decipher the eroded runes. Hearing Zhang Yan summon, she didn't hesitate and immediately rushed over. She passed through the array door, and not long after, she arrived at the main manor. After seeing Zhang Yan, she bowed and said, "Disciple greets master. May I know why you called disciple?" Zhang Yan asked warmly, "Disciple, how is your flying sword practice going?" Lu Yenny replied, "Recently, disciple has been searching for demons and honing my swordsmanship. I feel that I have made some progress." Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "Demons and demons have very different methods compared to the people of our profound gate. Moreover, they lack treasures, artifacts, divine arts, and Tao techniques. They only rely on their rough skin and thick flesh. Fighting them alone is still not enough." Lu Yenny was smart, and she immediately understood that her master wanted to teach her. She bowed and said, "Disciple, please give me some pointers, master." Zhang Yan smiled. He stretched out his hand and patted the surface of the small mirror. A figure appeared on the surface of the mirror. This person was sitting cross-legged in the mirror, breathing in and out, adjusting his internal energy. Lu Yenny couldn't help but look over curiously. Zhang Yan pointed his finger and said, "This person's name is Xiaohe. He's a first-tier core transformation cultivator. Last year, I used a spell to trap him in a formation. If you can last a few rounds against him, you'll have made some progress. Lu Yin's beautiful eyes lit up, and she said eagerly, Master, disciple is willing to try. Zhang Yan smiled and waved his sleeve, saying, Then go. Lu Yin only felt a gentle force supporting her, and her body was involuntarily thrown into the mirror. When she stabilized her body, she saw that she had already fallen into the place she saw just now. Since the day Xiao He fought with Zhang Yan, other than the mirror spirit throwing some life-prolonging elixirs to him every day, no one else paid attention to him. Over time, he also knew that it was useless to make noise, so he simply meditated and breathed to pass the time. But this was the bright nether heavenly lake, the abode of heavens. His talent was not bad, and he had already given up on the idea of going out, so he only focused on cultivating. In this 1 year, his cultivation had actually made great progress, and even his originally violent temper had calmed down a bit. Sometimes he thought it was inconceivable. Zhang Yan had obviously trapped him, but it seemed to have helped him instead. He sensed Lu Yin almost as soon as she entered the formation. At first, he thought it was Zhang Yan, and his eyes lit up. He stood up excitedly, ready to fight, but when he saw who it was, disappointment appeared in his eyes, and he scolded, Zhang Yan, what are you trying to do? You didn't come yourself, but sent a little girl. Could it be that you're sending her to her death? Zhang Yan smiled and said from outside the mirror, Senior brother Xiao, this is my eldest disciple, Lu Yin. In 2 years, it will be the sex competition, and she wants to find someone to hone her swordsmanship. Senior brother's skills are brilliant, and your cultivation is profound, so please give her some pointers. Xiao He was startled and said, Your disciple? His expression changed, and his mind became active. He thought to himself, I don't know if this Zhang Yan is muddle-headed. He actually sent his disciple to fight with me. I won't take her life. I'll just capture her alive. Let's see if he dares to not let me out then. Lu Yin was still at the first level of the mystic light realm. If they were to fight head-on, Xiao He could kill her with a wave of his hand. However, this place was different. This was the little pot mirror forbidden formation. Although it couldn't kill the enemy, it could trap and block people, and it could block treasures and techniques. It was the best place for disciples to hone their swordsmanship. However, Xiao He didn't know the profoundness of this place. When Zhang Yan fought with him that day, he didn't need to use such a method, so he thought that this formation could only trap people. After Xiao He made up his mind, he didn't rush forward. He just stood there and didn't move. He didn't want to scare away his disciple, Zhang Yan, by himself. Lu Yin didn't lose her respect when she saw Xiao He. She came forward and bowed from afar, saying, Martial Uncle Xiao, this junior greets you. If I offend you later, please don't blame me. Xiao He looked her up and down, and a trace of shock appeared on his face. He cursed in his heart, what kind of dog shit luck does this Zhang Yan have? He actually found a disciple like this 1 in 10,000. With this kind of talent, even if she doesn't do anything and just sits in this clear nether heavenly lake for a few decades, she can still cultivate to the core transformation realm. Target equals _blank. Chapter 309. Book C Pavilion. After Lu Yin finished her greeting, she cast a spell and commanded her flying sword to fly out. It circled in the air and charged at Xiao He with murderous intent. She knew that the person in front of her was a core transformation realm cultivator just like her master. Although she was protected by a formation, she didn't dare to be careless. This training was to improve her swordsmanship, but who would let a core transformation realm cultivator be a sparring partner for a mystic light realm cultivator? This was a rare opportunity, so she cherished it very much. She treated it like a battle of life and death. Her expression was solemn, and she used her full strength from the start. Like a shooting star piercing through the night sky, the bright and dazzling speck of light suddenly approached. Xiao He smiled contemptuously. He clasped both hands behind his back, and without moving his body, a thread of evil pill flew out from under his feet and transformed into a violent wave, slapping the sword orb to one side in a flash. Lu Yin's heart trembled when she saw his careless look. She pulled the moon-missing sword pill back and turned it into a silver thread that wrapped around her fingertip. She knew how strong a core transformation realm cultivator was, but she had no idea how strong they were. Now, she had a clear understanding of them. Ever since Zhang Yan gave her this sword pill, it had always been successful against enemies and beasts. Even when she sparred with cultivators of the same generation, she never fell into a disadvantage. Qiu Hanyue lost every time she fought against her, but she didn't expect this person to easily knock the sword pill away with just a splash of water. Suddenly, the sound of the tide rang out under Xiao He's feet. Smoke surged in all directions, turning into torrential water that spread in all directions to the west. One could see layers upon layers of water constantly churning, turning into long rivers that floated in the air. Along with these waves, there were also wisps of pill-fiend smoke. Lu Yeni didn't know what he wanted to do. But she knew. If he was facing an enemy seriously, he would absolutely not allow his opponent to use his methods so easily. Thus, with a clear shout, he turned into a ray of light and flew away. He pushed the ray of light to the limit and moved around Xiao Ling, looking for an opportunity to attack. Xiao Ling narrowed his eyes and looked at the silver light dancing in front of him, but he didn't care at all. After all, there was a huge gap between their realms. It was also unable to cut through the black water formed by his pill fiend. If it had been Zhang Yan, he would have only dared to defend. He wouldn't have dared to go all out. Otherwise, if there was a gap, he would have killed his way in. Then he took the head. However, after Lu Yini circled around a few times, she saw that Xiao He was standing there, seemingly defenseless and full of openings. However, out of caution, she did not rush to attack. Xiao Ling had originally planned to wait for Lu Yeni to attack with her sword pellet before attacking at the same time. This way, it would be easier to capture her. However, after waiting for a long time, he still didn't come up. He was starting to get impatient. He thought to himself, I can't do anything to Zhang Yan, but don't tell me I can't catch a mere disciple of his? Thinking of this, he was not in the mood to wait any longer. He waved his sleeve towards the sky, and the Dan evil that was originally scattered in the surroundings suddenly turned into Xian water. Waves surged under the ground, and thousands of hectares of clear water poured down from above, almost like an inescapable net, pressing down from all directions. He grinned and said, Let's see where you can escape to. Lu Yini was shocked and hurriedly urged the sword light to escape. However, she didn't fly for long before she hit a wall of water. It was as if she had hit a flexible wall of qi. Instead, she gently pushed her back. She didn't think much and quickly changed to another position. However, the same thing happened to her. Seeing that the Xian water was getting closer, she was like a small boat in the sea that could capsize at any time in the strong wind and huge waves. However, at this moment, the mirror spirit quietly turned the formation and moved all the surging waves away. In the blink of an eye, there was nothing between the two of them. The stormy waves seemed to have never appeared. When Xiao He saw this, he was dumbfounded. His original plan was just right. He first secretly distributed the Dan evil around, and when Lu Yeni was trapped in the water curtain, he would launch it all at once. In this way, even if Zhang Yan wanted to save her, he wouldn't be able to stop him. Then he could capture Lu Yeni and use her as a hostage. But he never thought that this formation could actually move his Xian water away. Thinking that he had been fooled, Xiao He immediately roared, Zhang Yan, are you playing tricks on me? The anger in his heart surged up, he circulated his Xian qi, smoke and cloud rose up from his body, he simply tore away the gentle disguise he wore just now, and was about to use all his strength to capture Lu Yeni regardless of anything. Zhang Yan took a few glances, and he smiled in his heart. He naturally couldn't allow Xiao He to be so unbridled. He stretched out a hand and pointed, and a sword orb leaped out from between his brows and headed straight for Xiao He's face. Xiao He suddenly saw a sword light coming from the corner of his eye. The momentum and brilliance of that sword light was completely incomparable to Lu Yeni's. He was startled and didn't dare to force his hand. He could only raise his sleeve and forcibly pull up a wall of water to protect himself. The cold and oppressive sword light circled around his body. Seeing that it had forced him to stop, it disappeared again. Because Xiao He was afraid of Zhang Yan's sword pill, he couldn't go all out. Moreover, with the formation here, he couldn't even capture Lu Yeni. At this moment, he could guess what Zhang Yan was planning, but even though he knew it, he was helpless. He couldn't let Lu Yenyi attack him. Otherwise, even if he couldn't be hurt, he would still lose too much face. Seeing that Zhang Yan was watching the two people fighting in the mirror, the black-clothed scholar lowered his body slightly and said in a low voice, "Master, why don't you make an agreement with this Xiaohe? As long as he is willing to properly instruct Master's disciple, after 3 years, he can be released?" Seeing Zhang Yan turn his head to look at him, he bowed again and said, "What this lowly one means is that after 3 years, this body of his will be given to Xiaohe. Even if I deceive him once, what's the harm? We can still exchange it for his assistance. Wouldn't that be even better?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Your idea is not bad, but at this moment, it can't be used." Book C Pavilion. Updated first, yes. The black-clothed scholar was puzzled and said, "This lowly one is slow-witted, I don't know the reason?" Zhang Yan said, "This Xiaohe is hot-tempered, proud and arrogant. I've trapped him for a year, but no one has come to rescue him. Now he has a guilty conscience and has lost his confidence. You saw that when he attacked just now, he was already extremely restrained and didn't dare to seriously injure anyone. But if you say so, he will instead have hope and think that someone from the Shao clan wants to rescue him. He will definitely attack without restraint and return to his old ways. Even if you can operate the restrictive formation to protect Yenny, it will not be beneficial for her to hone her swordsmanship." The black-clothed scholar suddenly understood and said, "So that's how it is. Master is wise." Zhang Yan watched a few more times and saw that Lu Yenyi's sword light was moving and turning. Because Xiaohe was afraid of him making a move, he only focused on defending himself and occasionally counterattacked. There was no need for him to take care of this place. The mirror spirit was more than enough to deal with it, so he didn't watch anymore and returned to the jade couch to sit cross-legged. He reached into his sleeve and touched the remnant of the jade, his mind sinking into it. At this moment, there were only 2 paths left in his sea of consciousness. Having deduced to this point, if his luck was good, he might have chosen the final path if he had to choose one. But after deducing to this point, he discovered that every time he cut off a wrong path, the understanding of the path in his sea of consciousness would become a bit clearer. Thus, he felt that the deduction of this cultivation technique wasn't the final path forward, and he had to deduce all of it. If he was able to completely sever all 6 paths, then he would be able to investigate the method and trace the source to find the final profundity. He smiled slightly and threw away the distracting thoughts. He randomly picked one of the 2 paths and began to deduce using the 9-number sutra. At the same time, in the cave of Splendid Een Peak on Happiness Island, a Taoist in his 30s with long eyebrows that reached his temples woke up from meditation. He stretched out his hand, and a stream of light swam between his fingers like a firefly. He could not help but sigh. "After 45 years of hard work, I've finally succeeded." He let out a long laugh and stood up, pushing the door open and walking out. A Taoist child who was dozing off outside was stunned at first when he saw the Taoist. Then he ran out joyfully and shouted, "Eldest martial uncle has come out of seclusion, eldest martial uncle has come out of seclusion." As soon as this voice came out, it immediately alerted everyone on the island. Immediately, dozens of streaks of light flew over, and before long, a large group of people gathered around the Taoist. All of them had excited expressions on their faces as they called out, "Eldest senior brother." The Taoist glanced at the crowd and smiled. He cupped his hands and said, "My fellow junior martial brothers, 40 years ago, I was too eager for quick success. Regardless of the fact that I had yet to master my supernatural powers, I wanted to challenge for the position of the top 10 disciples. In the end, I stopped halfway and failed to fulfill my master's last wish. This is my fault." Someone in the crowd said angrily, "How can you blame senior martial brother? That Xiao Sa did not dare to fight with senior martial brother, but he sent Luo Yuanhua to check on senior martial brother. What a shameless trick." The Taoist shook his head and said, "That's not true. I only realized later that with my skills, even if I fought with Xiao Sa directly, I would still lose, and I would lose miserably. It was not that he was afraid of me, but he underestimated me and did not want to fight with me." His name was Huang Fuzhou, and he was a disciple of an elder from the same lineage of master and disciple. Although he was not a true disciple, he had obtained an ancient immortal technique by chance. After practicing hard for a long time, he finally stepped into the core transformation realm. At that time, he thought highly of himself and was eager to fight for the position of the top 10 disciples. During the sex competition, he challenged Xiao Sa, who was ranked 5th among the top 10 disciples. However, Xiao Sa's disciple, Luo Yuanhua, accepted his challenge and fought for 7 days and nights. Just now, he defeated Luo Yuanhua. At that time, he still wanted to step forward and ask for a fight. But at that time, Xiao Sha didn't want to fight with him. Xiao Sha just sat on the high rock and told him about the flaws in his cultivation technique one by one, as well as the method to overcome them. At that time, he was sweating profusely and feeling dispirited. Admitting that he was no match for Xiao Sha, he retreated. However, he was also very unwilling to give up. If it was not for his eagerness to master those powerful techniques, he would not have ended up like this. Therefore, he had been in seclusion in the sect for more than 40 years. He only practiced hard, just so that he could show his brilliance in the competition. Huang Fuzhou cupped his hands and said, "Senior martial brother, it was all thanks to you that I was able to form my gold core back then. I can't express my gratitude with words. Please accept my bow." After he finished speaking, he bowed deeply. The dozens of people surrounding him moved away. Someone said, "Senior brother Huang, your cultivation is the highest among master's disciples. As long as you can seize the position of one of the top 10 disciples, the efforts of the other brothers and sisters will not be in vain." Huang Fuzhou smiled proudly and said, "Don't worry, senior martial brothers. Now that I have mastered the immortal technique, I am not afraid even if there is a supernatural power to stop me. If we fight with our own strength, who would I be afraid of?" Book C Pavilion, target equals, _blank. Chapter 310. Book C Pavilion. Because Huang Fuzhou came out from his closed-door cultivation, all the disciples on the Happiness Island were overjoyed. The island was filled with laughter. As far as they were concerned, it wasn't that eldest senior brother was no match for Xiao Sa, but it was because the latter had played tricks on him. Otherwise, why wouldn't eldest senior brother come out and fight? As for Huang Fuzhou's words, they only thought that he was being modest and didn't take it to heart. Ever since their master had passed away, the disciples on the island had lost their confidence in their sect and were often looked down upon by others. Therefore, the disciples on the island were the most united in the Qinsong school. When one of them was bullied, they would often stand together to seek justice. Moreover, there was still Huang Fuzhou, the backbone of the island. After all, he was a core transformation realm cultivator and had once defeated sword immortal Luo Yuanhua. Others feared his prestige and didn't dare to go too far. However, if there was a conflict, they would stop in moderation. In the last 60 years, all the disciples on the island had given all the cultivation materials they had obtained to Huang Fuzhou alone, and they hoped that he would be able to seize the position of one of the top 10 disciples. If he was able to do so, then they would be able to hold their heads high, and it was even to the extent that they wouldn't have to work so hard when they cultivated in the future. After Huang Fuzhou talked about old times with his junior brothers, he asked with a smile, "I've been in seclusion for more than 40 years. I wonder if there are any changes in the mountain gate?" One of the disciples immediately said, "There are a lot of big things happening in the sect. The 3 lake demons on the other side have been expelled by our Qinsong school. Speaking of this, I have to mention that an amazing person has appeared in my lineage. His name is Zhang Yan, and he is the disciple of the head of the Danding courtyard, spiritual master Zhou." Huang Fuzhou said in surprise, "Oh, you're actually a disciple of Chancellor Zhou?" He nodded again. There are rumors that schoolmaster Zhou was once a disciple of a large clan, and he is also a Yuanying cultivator. Presumably, the disciple he taught is not bad. Not only that, the disciple's saliva splattered as he recounted everything that Zhang Yan had done in the past, and he finally said, "Eldest senior brother, that senior brother Zhang is also a true disciple. I think senior brother will be able to see him in this grand competition." The reason why he had a good impression of Zhang Yan was because of the rumor that Feng Zhen had spread a few days ago. It was said that Zhang Yan had plotted to kill Xiao Han and his nephew, and then got Xiao Ling into the formation. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive, but the Xiao clan could do nothing to him. Back then, Huang Fuzhou had been forced to retreat by Xiao Sha's words, so he hated the Xiao clan. Zhang Yan's actions. This allowed the Nourishing Island disciples to feel extremely relieved. What? This person is a true disciple? Huang Fuzhou's expression turned solemn. If it was said that he didn't care earlier, then he had completely put away the contempt in his heart. He also knew that since the great change in the sect, there hadn't been a true disciple for 100 years. If what his junior brother said was true, then this person was really not simple. Just thinking about it made him feel that it was a little unbelievable. Suddenly, he felt an inexplicable pressure, and he thought to himself, I have been in seclusion for more than 40 years. Although I have achieved Shen cultivation, there must be a lot of talented people in the sect. I must not be arrogant, lest I repeat the mistakes of the past. Thinking of this, he stroked his long beard and slowly stood up. He said, I need to leave the island once, at most half a month, at least 3 to 5 days, and I will return. The disciples hurriedly asked, Senior brother, where are you going? Huang Fuzhou said in a low voice, Since I have come out of seclusion, I need to go see Senior Brother Qi. When the disciples heard this, they all nodded in agreement. Their master had died early, and Huang Fuzhou had also received Qi Yintian's support. Just now, he could challenge for the position of the top 10 disciples. After coming out of seclusion, it was reasonable for him to go and see him. But they didn't know. After Huang Fuzhou heard about Zhang Yan, he was a little more worried. This Zhang Yan was just a disciple that had risen in these 20 years. Then what about before? Was there such a person? For cultivators, 46 years was just a moment, but he understood that as long as there was a master to guide and take care of him, it was enough for many outstanding people to emerge. Would Senior Brother Qi still support him like he did in the past? This was all uncertain. So he didn't have the mood to talk leisurely. After bidding farewell to his junior brothers, he rose from the ground and turned into a wisp of smoke, heading towards the profound Water True Palace. There was no time in the mountains. After Zhang Yan went into seclusion, another half a year had passed. At this time, in the Zhao Yu main residence, he had reached a critical juncture in his deduction. As the pill evil qi was used up, his whole body's aura swelled, as if he had broken some kind of barrier. The last path in his sea of consciousness suddenly collapsed. All of a sudden, a mysterious and indescribable feeling hit his heart. His body shook slightly, and he reached out his hand to draw on the ground with his finger. His pen moved like a dragon and a snake, writing hundreds of erosion runes. When the spiritual sense faded, his fingers stopped on the last stroke. After sitting silently for a moment, when he opened his eyes again, he thought that it was a close call. He didn't expect that at this last step, there would be such a change. Just now, at the last moment, he actually triggered a spiritual opportunity, causing countless mysterious feelings to emerge and flash through his sea of consciousness. But it was fleeting. He wanted to use the broken jade to recreate it, but he couldn't do it no matter what. At that moment, if it wasn't for his deep foundation in erosion runes, and the wonderful feeling of the spiritual sense to write hundreds of erosion runes in time, his previous hard work would have been wasted. But now, it was finally complete. He smiled and patted his knees in a relaxed manner. Then, he raised his hand and the hundreds of erosion runes floated up from the ground. Then, he looked at them and read them. In the process, he also found that it was difficult to fully express the meaning of the deduced magic art. Even if he could decipher it, it was still inferior. Only the erosion runes could carry the truth. Therefore, he couldn't help but speculate that the ancient almighties endowed true immortals must have sensed the mystery in this way, comprehended the truth of heaven and earth, and then recorded it in the erosion runes book. After this cultivation method went through his mind, it didn't take long for him to understand it. But as to how much power he could use the water elemental true light, he needed to practice it before he could know. He pondered for a while and said, "Where is the mirror spirit?" The black-robed scholar came out and said respectfully, "Master, I am here." Zhang Yan said in a deep voice, "Is everything okay inside and outside the cave residence?" The black-robed scholar said, "Master, everything is fine in the cave residence. Even Xiao Bo, who is trapped in the formation, is fine. But in the Qinsong Mountain Gate, I heard that an extraordinary core formation cultivator came out of seclusion not long after Master went into seclusion." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised and said, "Oh, your eyes and ears are quite sharp. You even know about the trivial matters in the Mountain Gate?" He cultivated in the clear nether heavenly lake. There were advantages and disadvantages. The spiritual qi here was abundant, so it was easier for him to cultivate than the disciples in the Mountain Gate. But the disadvantage was that if something happened in the Mountain Gate, someone would send a letter by flying sword. He didn't know about the trivial matters. He didn't expect the mirror spirit to be able to find out about it. The black-robed scholar didn't dare to take credit. He quickly waved his hand and said, "It's not a small contribution. It's just that Lun Yangzi has a few good friends in the Mountain Gate. They would go to the Mountain Gate from time to time. When they came back, they would write down all the trivial matters and stick them on the table for Master to check." Zhang Yan thought of Qiu Hanyue, Qin Nan, and the others who were good friends with Lu Yenny. He couldn't help nodding and said, "As a woman, Yenny is very careful." He knew that since Lu Yenny deliberately mentioned this person, he was not a simple person. So he said, "Tell me about this person." The black-robed scholar bowed and said, "This person's name is Huang Fuzhou. He is a disciple of the Master and Disciple sect. I heard that in the last competition, he defeated sword immortal Luo Yuanhua, which caused a commotion in the sect. Later, he was forced to retreat by one of the top 10 disciples, Xiao Sua. Now that 46 years have passed, this person came out and said that he wanted to fight Xiao Sua again in the competition." When Zhang Yan heard this name, he felt that it was somewhat familiar. After thinking for a while, he remembered that when he was chatting with Qi Yuntian, Fan Chongqing and the others, he had vaguely mentioned this person. Book C Pavilion. His Xian cultivation was brilliant, especially good at breaking magic treasures and flying swords. He was also an extraordinary person of the Master and Disciple sect. He smiled slightly. If he guessed correctly, the reason why this person said this at this time was to tell others that Xiao Sua was his chosen opponent and no one was allowed to compete with him. Although Zhang Yan also wanted to compete for the position of the top 10 disciples, his target was not Xiao Sua, but someone else. So he had no conflict of interest with this person, and in a sense, they might even be allies. After thinking for a while, he put this matter aside and asked about the cultivation of the disciples. The mirror spirit was in charge of the cave mansion, so she knew everything inside and outside. She immediately told him about the situation of each disciple, not daring to miss anything. Currently, Lu Yenny was the only one under Zhang Yan's tutelage who could participate in the inner disciple competition. Ever since her match with Xiao He, she had also noticed that she was lacking in many areas. Therefore, she had to find Xiao He to test her sword every month. Her flying sword technique was improving by leaps and bounds. Tian Kuan had been cultivating in the underwater mansion since he was a child, and had long been accustomed to cultivating alone. Even without the supervision of a master, he would still cultivate in seclusion all day long. When it came to diligence, no one could compare to him, so Zhang Yan didn't need to spend any more time on him. The Wang sisters, on the other hand, had made considerable progress in the Tao of erosion glyphs under Lu Yenny's guidance over the past year. Moreover, given their age, they couldn't delay any longer. It was time to pass on their Xian techniques. Zhang Yan nodded. "These two sisters are also diligent. Go and call them to me." The black-robed scholar accepted the order and hurriedly left. The Wang sisters were reading the ancient eroded runes in the cave mansion when they suddenly heard their master's summons. They didn't dare to be negligent. After washing up and tidying up their appearances, they went to the main mansion. Ever since the day they acknowledged their master, they hadn't seen Zhang Yan again, but their reverence for him hadn't diminished at all. Having lived in the clear nether heavenly lake for many years, they also knew about the matters of the sect in the past. They knew that their master had done many earth-shattering things, and they were both shocked and impressed. At this moment, when they thought about going to see their master, they immediately felt nervous. The two sisters were led into the array door by the mirror spirit, but the scenery in front of them changed. In a moment, they were in a strange cave house. Seeing Zhang Yan sitting on the jade couch, the two hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed. They said in unison, "Disciple greets master." Chapter 3:11. The Wang sisters kowtowed 3 times to show their respect to heaven, earth, and their master. When they were done, Zhang Yan raised his hand and said warmly, "You too may rise." The 2 sisters agreed softly. They got up and stood to the side with their hands clasped. Zhang Yan didn't say anything. He just carefully sized up the 2 sisters. Compared to half a year ago, the temperament of these 2 disciples was different. Compared to a year ago, Wang Kaiwei was even more quiet and elegant. Wang Kating had also changed from her lively appearance. She stood there obediently. Although her bright and beautiful eyes were still as mischievous and lively as before, she did not dare to overstep her etiquette. Zhang Yan nodded in satisfaction. He raised his hand, and 2 talisman scripts flew onto the table. He said in a deep voice, "These 2 talisman scripts are written in the eroded script. Since you 2 have studied it for many years, explain it to me." At this moment, the 2 sisters felt a chill in their hearts. Wang Kaiwei composed herself and bowed to Zhang Yan. Then she reached out her slender hand and picked up a talisman, holding it in front of her eyes. Wang Kating also curtsied and hurriedly placed the talisman in front of her chest. She took a few deep breaths before she dared to pick it up and look at it. At first, they were a little nervous, but after a few glances, they gradually calmed down. Although it was not easy to create these eroded words, it was not beyond what they had learned. Moreover, there were only a dozen or so words. It was nothing more than spending a little more time to deduce them. They were all determined and took out the bamboo chips they had brought with them at the same time. The art of erosion glyphs was broad and profound. They had just started learning it, so they didn't have the ability to deduce it out of thin air. Thus, they needed this object's help. The 2 sisters looked at each other. Since this was the first time they were deducing the erosion runes in front of Zhang Yan, they were eager to compete. After an hour, the 2 sisters stopped at almost the same time and wrote down the content of their interpretation on a piece of white paper with graceful calligraphy. Only then did they hand it over to Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan took it and swept his eyes over it. He couldn't help but nod. Although the Wang sisters' aptitude was inferior to Lu Yenni's, under the supervision of this eldest senior sister, they were still diligent and hard-working. The corrosive runes that they had deciphered were all in line with the norm. In his opinion, there were some flaws and mistakes, but it was not their fault. It was just that they had not cultivated Shen techniques, so their foundation was not strong enough. Zhang Yan put down the paper and took out 2 talisman tablets from his sleeve. Picking up a pen, he wrote down the essence building and meridian opening cultivation methods, and pointed them out to the 2 people, and said in a gentle voice, "From today onwards, the 2 of you can start practicing the pure Qi scripture." Although it was only a few words, the 2 sisters' beautiful eyes lit up, and they were very excited. After entering the sect for a year and a half, although they did not slack off in learning the corrosive runes, but in the end, only by practicing the cultivation method could they be considered as a member of the profound sect. They happily bowed down and said, "Thank you, benefactor master, for teaching us the cultivation method." Zhang Yan nodded, smiled, and waved his sleeve. 2 years later, master will come back to test you 2 again. Go. The 2 sisters complied and retreated. However, after Wang Kaiwei stepped through the array door, the space between her eyebrows suddenly swelled and a white light flew out. A graceful lady dressed in white appeared out of nowhere and held her hand. Using a soft and gentle voice, she whispered into her ear, "Kai, cultivate well. After you open your meridians and break through, this little girl will teach you a superior profound technique." Wang Kaiwei did not feel strange. She looked to the side and saw that this woman was clearly the one she saw when she became a disciple. She wanted to ask again, but suddenly the woman in white disappeared. She looked to her left and right and saw that her little sister Wang Kating was in high spirits, and did not notice anything strange. She opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but stopped. Then, she shook her head, suppressed her thoughts, and followed Wang Kating's light footsteps back to the mansion. When the woman in white appeared, Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows, as if he sensed something. However, this was Wang Caiwei's opportunity, and he would not interfere. If the murderous blade spirit taught her a cultivation method, it would be the cultivation method of the Chongyue True Temple. Although this sect was not one of the top 10 sects of the Profound Sect, the cultivation method of the sect was also very superior, and it could also be cultivated to the Grotto Heaven realm. This disciple of his was very lucky. With the help of the spiritual treasure, her cultivation would be twice the result with half the effort. However, this spiritual treasure also had karma, and it was not that easy to resolve. How far she could go in the future depended entirely on her. Zhang Yan smiled and let this matter go, no longer paying attention to it. After dealing with all the matters in the sect, he also turned his thoughts back to cultivation. Now there was still a year and a half before the sect competition, and it was extremely urgent. Therefore, he was not willing to delay any longer. He sat on the jade couch, and after a few breaths, he took out the remnant jade, and his mind sank into it, practicing the cultivation method that was deduced. After a few days, his mind was completely familiar with this cultivation method, and he withdrew from the remnant jade. He circulated the cultivation method a little, and then reached out with his hand. After a loud sound, a ray of water shot out, and reached a distance of 10 feet. This light was still thin at the tip of his finger, like the smoke of a candle, but the further it went, the wider it became. At the end, it was 9 feet across, like a small river, and one could hear the surging sound of water. Seeing this, Zhang Yan could not help but be excited, and he said in his heart, "Good method. With this cultivation method, there will be no need for the water essence qi in the future." The water element profound light that he cultivated was refined by using the water essence qi, and it was usually hidden in his body, not easily used, and just now when fighting with others, it was released. But although this cultivation method was extremely powerful, it actually had a flaw, and that was if it was cut off by some magic treasure or cultivation method, then it needed to be refined again with the help of the water essence qi. But not to mention that this cultivation method required a lot of effort and wasted energy, the 5 elements essence was extremely precious, and it was extremely difficult to collect. He did not have much in his hands, so he could not squander it wantonly. Moreover, it could be imagined that once the water essence qi and water element true light were exhausted, this cultivation method would become water without a source, and a tree without roots. Although this possibility was extremely small, but he had to prepare for a rainy day. And now, Zhang Yan could already let go of this knot in his heart. This water element true light was directly formed from the pill baleful energy after he used the cultivation method, which meant that in the future, as long as his pill baleful energy still existed, the water element true light could be destroyed and reborn at will, without fear of being depleted, and he did not need to rely on the 5 elements essence qi anymore. This also meant that he was walking on the right path. The previous efforts had finally paid off, and his heart was also very excited. If he could deduce the remaining true light cultivation methods one by one, he believed that one day he would be able to control the 5 qi and once again display the power of the Taishan sect in the ancient times. In the next month, in addition to taking out an hour every day to absorb the essence qi and strengthen the pill baleful energy, Zhang Yan spent his time practicing this cultivation method. As his mastery of this cultivation method became more and more profound, he could also feel the changes in his body. On this day, he moved his mind, shook the golden core, and released a cloud of pill baleful energy. He saw this cloud of smoke sway in the air, and then it turned into a flowing water light curtain. In an instant, the sound of the tide surged, and the water light was more than twice as large as before he practiced this cultivation method. As he continued to operate the pill baleful energy, the water curtain also gradually flew up, rising higher and higher like a rising tide, almost occupying half of the cave. Perhaps because of the power of the Taishan true light, the entire main cave was somewhat unable to withstand it, and it began to gently shake. The mirror spirit in the small pot immediately sensed it, and the black-robed scholar stepped out of the mirror. With a point of his finger, the cave was immediately fixed, and there was no longer any trembling. Zhang Yan did not care about what was happening in the outside world, and only focused his mind to feel the changes within. When the water light had risen to its limit, he silently examined it, and found that he had used up almost 40% of the pill baleful energy. This was already the limit he could reach at the moment. If he continued to practice, as the accumulation of his cultivation method gradually deepened, he would be able to increase its power a bit more, but he understood that this was not something that could be done in a hurry. It had to be accumulated over a long period of time. Moreover, he still had some doubts in his heart. If this cultivation method did not have all 5 elements, he was afraid that he would not be able to reach the peak. But this was enough. It should be known that he had formed the first grade of the pill baleful energy, and the depth of the accumulation of the pill baleful energy was not something that others could imagine. Even 40% was enough to contend with his opponents. However, at this time, Zhang Yan fell into deep thought. There was still 1 year and 5 months until the day of the sect competition, and he had 2 choices. One was to consolidate the mysterious water true light and try to see if he could increase its power by a bit, and the other was to forcefully deduce the earth true light cultivation method and strive to cultivate another cultivation method before the competition. According to the time it took to deduce the water true light, if he wanted to deduce the earth true light cultivation method, the time was actually a bit tight, and he might not be able to complete it before the competition. But after thinking for a while, he felt that if he temporarily put everything aside and deduced the cultivation method with all his might, it was not impossible. Because in the nearly 2 years of cultivation, his pill baleful energy had grown a lot, which also meant that he could use more time to deduce the 9-number sutra. Moreover, there were many trivial matters in the cave that he could not personally attend to, and even absorbing the true sand essence every day took up a lot of energy. But if he wholeheartedly used the remaining time to deduce in the jade, it was very likely that he would be able to deduce this cultivation method. After thinking seriously for a long time, he finally decided to choose the latter method and deduce the earth true light cultivation method as well. This was not him messing around. With his current strength, even if he did not absorb the true sand essence for a year, his cultivation method would not regress, but he would not be able to increase the pill baleful energy. But his pill baleful energy was originally vigorous, and losing a little would not affect the overall situation. It would only delay the time of breaking through by a year, and he could still bear it. But once one cultivated the earth element true light, the meaning would be greatly different. One more cultivation technique was equivalent to one more method to deal with the enemy. With 2 true lights, one's strength would be sufficient to multiply, and one's chances of seizing the position of the top 10 disciples would be much higher. Since he had decided, there was nothing to hesitate about. He simply closed the door of the cave, isolated the inside from the outside, slowly inhaled, and slowly exhaled. After doing this a few times, his mind was unprecedentedly focused, and then he picked up the remnant of the jade and immersed himself in it. Target equals, _blank. Chapter 312. Sipt, C equals. Placiate equals 3274. Huang Fuzhou came to the Xianshui Palace and waited patiently for half an hour. A Taoist came out and led him to the side hall. The Taoist served him fragrant tea and said, "Uncle Huang, you came at a bad time. The sect competition is near and my master is in seclusion. I'm afraid he has no time to see you." Huang Fuzhou sighed. This was the 3rd time he came here after half a year. However, he got the same answer every time. Qi Yuntian was the head of the top 10 disciples, Yuaning Zhenren. Since he became one of the top 10 disciples, no one dared to challenge him. Now that his cultivation was even more profound and unpredictable, why would he need to seclusion? This was obviously an excuse. He did not want to see him. However, Huang Fuzhou could not lose his temper. He knew it was useless, but he forced himself to ask, "When will senior brother Qi come out?" The Taoist shook his head and said, "Maybe half a year, maybe a year. As for the specific date, I really don't know." When Huang Fuzhou heard this, his heart felt even more empty. He had been in closed-door training for 45 years. Originally, he was full of himself and wanted to pull himself together, but he didn't expect to receive such a cold reception. However, he was also a person with a firm heart. Once he set his mind on something, he wouldn't easily give up. Otherwise, He wouldn't have gone into closed-door training for over 40 years. However, the position of the top 10 disciples was not only a competition among the disciples but also a game between the aristocratic families and the masters. If he could not get Qi Yuntian's promise, what could he do even if he defeated Xiao Sha? He sat until sunrise. Just now, he stood up and bid farewell to the Taoist. He left the Xianshui Palace and looked up at the magnificent sunset. He made up his mind. From now on, he would come here every day until senior brother Qi agreed to see him. Just as he was about to ride the cloud, a Taoist with a round face walked out of the palace. Seeing his back, the Taoist called out loudly, "Is that senior martial brother Huang?" Huang Fuzhou looked back and his expression changed. He smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "So it's junior brother Fan. I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you?" Fan Chongqing patted his belly and said with a smile, "Junior brother, I am fat and relaxed. Of course it's very good." He then asked in surprise, "Why? Is senior brother Huang also here to see eldest senior brother?" Huang Fuzhou sighed and said, "That's true. This is the third time I've come to pay my respects to senior brother Qi since I came out of seclusion. Why haven't I seen your face yet?" Eldest senior brother is also in seclusion. It's not easy for me to meet him. Fan Chongqing narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Junior brother, that disciple of mine has recently presented quite a bit of immortal tea. I heard that it is a secret stash of Zhou Monastery head. If I remember correctly, senior brother Huang is also a person of this path. Why don't you go and have a taste?" Huang Fuzhou's heart skipped a beat. Although Fan Chongqing was Meng Zhen's disciple in name, he was from the same sect as Qi Yuntian. Moreover, every time this eldest senior brother wanted to help the younger generation, he would always be the one to do it. Now that he had invited him, could it be Qi Yuntian's arrangement? Thinking up to here, he couldn't restrain the excitement in his heart. However, his self-cultivation was outstanding after all, and no one could see through his inner thoughts on his face. He said in an extremely natural manner, "Since it's junior brother's request, how can I refuse?" Fan Chongqing laughed and said, Good, good. Senior brother, please follow me." The two of them went all the way south. In just a moment, they arrived at a beautiful and warm snail island. Huang Fuzhou looked around and saw green grass under the pine and cypress trees. Green vine, purple radish, red flowers and yellow flowers. His eyes were filled with colorful makeup. Young deer were jumping beside the mountain stream and birds were singing happily. He could not help but be surprised and said, "This beautiful scenery is where senior brother's disciple lives?" Fan Chongqing pointed down and said with a smile, "Senior brother has been in seclusion for more than 40 years. I'm afraid you don't know that I have recently accepted a good disciple. It's a girl who is cultivating on this green vine island. Senior brother has not seen her yet." "I see." Huang Fuzhou nodded. He could not be blamed for feeling strange earlier. Fan Chongqing had always been strict and cautious in accepting disciples. He also knew the disciple from before. He was a dull person and would not decorate the place of cultivation like this. It must be a good disciple that he had accepted in recent years. Otherwise, he would not have said good. As soon as the two of them arrived at the edge of the island, a beautiful female cultivator with clear eyes came to greet them on a two-colored mystic light. She first bowed to the two of them and then pulled Fan Chongqing's sleeve, shaking it left and right, pretending to be pitiful. She said, "Master, why did you come to see your poor disciple today?" Fan Chongqing felt a little awkward and said, "Han Yue, don't mess around. Your master has a fellow disciple here. How can I be rude?" Qiu Hanyue stuck out her tongue. Although she liked to play around, she still had to give her master some face. So she let go of her sleeve and stood to the side with a smile. Fan Chongqing pointed at Huang Fuzhou and said, "This is your uncle Master Huang. He entered the sect a few years earlier than your master. You have to call him Uncle Master." Qiu Hanyue's pretty face immediately became serious. She bowed to Huang Fuzhou respectfully and said affectionately, "Uncle Master." Then she raised her head and blinked. She smiled mischievously and said, "Uncle Master, do you have a greeting gift for my nephew?" Huang Fuzhou stroked his beard and smiled. He took out a golden toad the size of a baby's fist and handed it to Chiu Hanyue. He said, "Uncle Master came in a hurry and did not prepare anything good. This little thing is called Treasure of the Fallen. You only need to whisper to it and it will find treasures hidden in the soil. It works every time. I give it to my nephew to play with." Although he was invited by Fan Chongqing halfway, he originally wanted to visit Qi Yuntian. So he also brought some gifts with him. He wanted to bribe the disciples of the mystical water palace, but the disciples did not dare to accept them. So in the end he did not use them. This golden toad was actually a rare treasure. He was not afraid to give it away. It was good that Fan Chongqing was willing to accept it. Maybe Fan Chongqing could put in a good word for him in front of Qi Yuntian. Fan Chongqing glanced at it and could roughly see that this thing was also quite rare. He thought for a while and his expression became serious. He said, "Senior, please come over and talk." The two of them went to a pavilion and sat down. Immediately, a servant girl on the island served fragrant tea. However, Huang Fuzhou was not in the mood to taste it. He only touched his lips and then put it down. His mouth followed Fan Chongqing's words and casually praised it. Although he still spoke freely on the surface, Fan Chongqing knew that his heart was not here. After chatting for a while, he picked up the teacup and blew on it. He said, "Senior Huang, this time you came out. Do you have any plans?" Seeing that they finally talked about serious matters, Huang Fuzhou sat up slightly and said cautiously, 46 years ago, I did not have a battle with Xiao Sha. I deeply regret it. This time I came out, I want to have another battle with him." After saying that, he looked at Fan Chongqing and waited for him to speak. Fan Chongqing put down the teacup and seemed to be thinking about something. After a long time, he slowly said, "Senior, do you know Junior Ning Chong Xian Ning?" Huang Fuzhou nodded and said, "I have also heard of him from the other junior brothers. I did not expect that there would be such a person in my line of disciples." Fan Chongqing said, "Junior Ning Chong is the disciple of Martial Uncle Sunday. This time, he is going to fight for the position of the top 10 disciples. This matter, Master Meng and the other two. Book C Pavilion. Net. Update, Martial Uncle also knows about it." Huang Fuzhou suddenly felt some bitterness in his mouth. After coming out of closed-door training, he also vaguely knew about Ning Chong Xian. He admitted that Ning Chong Xian's cultivation realm was not as good as his, but he was the proud disciple of Sun Jinren. Even if his teacher was still alive, it was impossible for him to compete with Ning Chong Xian. But he originally thought that Qi Yuntian did not support him alone, so he still had a chance. But listening to Fan Chongqing's words, it seemed that this time, he would only support Ning Chong Xian. Fan Chongqing saw that he did not speak, so he said, "Huang Shixiang, if you really want to give it a try, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to play it safe, there's no harm in taking it slow, the chances will be greater." After listening to this, Huang Fuzhou carefully pondered, and he already understood the deep meaning. If he wanted to compete for the position of the top 10 disciples, no one would stop him, but no one would support him. But if he gave up this competition and let Ning Chong Xian become one of the top 10 disciples, then in the next competition, they could free up their hands and support him to get the position. According to common sense, what Fan Chongqing said was indeed a safe way. But Huang Fuzhou did not think so. He had worked hard to cultivate for more than 40 years, but the result was that someone else got the chance. If he waited for another 24 years, who could guarantee that no outstanding disciple would step on his head? Not to mention others, even that Zhang Yan did not seem to be any worse than him. And even if he could afford to wait, how could those junior brothers on Yangyue Island afford to wait? After working so hard for so many years, it was not easy for them to get the chance, but when it was finally over, how could he explain it to them? He nodded, and then seemed to have made up his mind. A trace of determination flashed in his eyes, and he stood up, cupped his hands, and said, "Thank you, junior brother, for telling me the truth. It is late now, I will not stay any longer. Goodbye." Fan Chongqing hurriedly got up and said, "Senior brother Huang, I will send you off." Huang Fuzhou raised his hand to stop him, and said in a deep voice, "Junior brother, please wait." After he cupped his hands again, he turned into a wisp of smoke and went to the horizon, blending into the evening clouds. At this time, Qiu Hanyue came to Fan Changqing's side and asked curiously, "Master, from what you said just now, doesn't that mean that Uncle Master Zhang cannot fight for the position of the top 10 disciples?" Fan Changqing shook his head and laughed and said, "Who said he can't? Disciple, sometimes victory and defeat aren't as simple as you and I think. Junior brother Zhang's ability isn't bad, but without junior brother Ning's support from Daoist Sun, so what if he wins one round? He will not be able to stand." Qiu Hanyue nodded, not fully understanding, and then her eyes turned, but she had a little idea in her mind, thinking about how to inform senior sister Yan Yi about what happened today. After Huang Fuzhou left Jade Radish Island, he turned into a wisp of smoke and flew back to Nourishing Pleasure Island. However, on the way, a purplish-red smoke blocked his way, and a beautiful female Taoist nun with a horsetail whisk appeared. She cupped her hands and said, "Are you senior brother Huang Fuzhou?" Huang Fuzhou hurriedly stopped and cupped his hands and said, "Yes, I am. May I ask where you are from, senior sister?" The female Taoist nun waved her horsetail whisk and said seriously, "I am a disciple of Glittering Jewel Cave. Jinren has a decree for senior brother Huang to meet him." Huang Fuzhou's heart skipped a beat. Even with his reserved personality, he could not help but cry out, "Qin Jinren." Chapter 313. Longyuan Marsh, Jiamu Island. Gong Pei's face was fierce, but his eyes were full of fear and uneasiness. He grabbed the slightly deformed golden cup in his hand and poured wine into his mouth crazily. Even when the wine dripped down his cheeks and onto his clothes, he was not in the mood to wipe it. He just said with red eyes, "Ning Chongxian, I will accompany you to the end." At this moment, in the sky outside the island, Ning Chongxian, dressed in white, stood with a sword on his back. Blue clouds swirled under his feet, and white smoke fluttered in the air. He looked down at the flickering restrictive formation talisman on the island. His eyes were cold and deep. If he wanted to compete for the position of the top 10 disciples, he must first obtain the identity of a true disciple. The only way was to choose a true disciple from an aristocratic family to fight with him and win his position through this battle of life and death. There was a reason why he chose Gong Pei. Firstly, this person was in the core transformation realm like him. Secondly, this person's Taoist companion had a special identity. She was the disciple of Su Wenian, one of the eldest disciples. His target in this competition was suitable for him to fight. However, he did not know that Gong Pei's Taoist companion had now abandoned him. Since the year before last, Ning Chongxian had sent a duel letter to Jiamu Island. Because Jiao Pei knew that he was not Ning Chongshuan's opponent, he was afraid and sent the letter back. Ning Chongxian was not surprised. In the next year, he sent the duel letter again, but this person still refused to sign it. Just half a month ago, he sent the duel letter for the third time. At this time, Gong Pei had nowhere to hide. If he still did not accept the challenge, according to the sect rules, his identity as a true disciple would be removed. It would belong to Ning Chongxian. Previously, Gong Pei had asked for help everywhere, but no one was willing to help him. He knew that he had no hope, so he wrote a letter begging for mercy, saying that he was willing to admit defeat, leave Scorched Mu Island, and give up everything on the island. He only asked for his life. However, Ning Chongxian tore the letter without even looking at it. It was clear that he wanted to kill them all. At this point, Gong Pei was forced to the edge of the cliff. In despair, he dismissed all the disciples and opened the restrictive formation on the island. He just stayed in his shell and did not come out. The ultimate battle in Qinsong School. Because it involved the lives of the disciples, both sides could use their own methods. As long as they didn't ask for help from others, the magical treasures and formations could be used. Therefore, if one side's disciples didn't have absolute confidence, they could use the geographical advantage to open the restrictive formation and hide on the island. This was Gong Pei's plan. Now there was only 1 month left before the sex competition. He hoped that he could hold on until the day of the competition. He did not believe that Ning Chongxian would still stay here and stare at him. Ning Chongxian looked at the restriction array shrouded in mist in front of him. His chiseled face was expressionless. He flicked his finger and sent out a flying sword talisman. A moment later, a young girl arrived on a flying boat. She had a slender figure, red lips, and a picturesque face. When she arrived in front of Ning Chongxian, she immediately got off the flying boat and went forward to greet. Disciple pays respect to master. May I know why master is calling me? Ning Chongxian raised his hand, and a Rui spirit shuttle flew out and hovered in the air. Then, he said with his hands behind his back, take this to junior brother Zhang Yan. Borrow the 5 spirits white carp shuttle, used to break the formation. The young girl hurriedly agreed. She reached out and took the shuttle. Then she put it in a sachet and returned to the flying boat. She shook the talisman and flew away. After leaving the great lake of Dragon Abyss, she headed north and soon arrived outside the clear darkness heavenly lake. She stood in front of the cave abode and shot out the Rui divine shuttle in her hand. It shot out a cyan light and said loudly, I'm Mei Wanxi, a disciple of teacher Ning of Baixian Peak. I've been ordered by my master to find Uncle Master Zhang for something important. Not long after, the formation door in front of her opened, and Lu Yen personally came out to greet her. After a few words, she invited her into the main hall. When they arrived at the abode, Mei Wanxi didn't bother with small talk and hurriedly spoke of the purpose of her visit. Lu Yeni shook her head lightly when she heard this and sighed. Junior sister Mei, you really came at the wrong time. My master is in closed-door cultivation and hasn't come out for many days. Mei Wanxi anxiously asked, Senior sister Lu, when will Uncle Master Zhang come out of seclusion? Lu Yeni answered honestly, my master has been in closed-door training for the past few years. The shortest time is half a year, and the longest time is a year. He would only come out once. But now, he has been in closed-door training for 16 whole months. It is obvious that his cultivation technique this time is extraordinary. Mei Wanxi couldn't help but be disappointed. She sighed softly and said, Master is still waiting for a reply, so I can't stay for long. Since Uncle Master Zhang has no time, I'll take my leave first. It wasn't that Ning Chongxian didn't have a magic weapon, but it wasn't a magic weapon that could break the formation. On the other hand, Zhang Yan's 5-spirit white carp shuttle was famous and the most suitable weapon to break the formation on the island. But since he was in seclusion and couldn't borrow a magic weapon, Mei Wanxi could only go back first and make a decision later. Just as she was about to leave, she heard a voice coming from the cave abode. Since you're senior brother Ning's disciple, come to my abode. Lu Yeni revealed a happy expression. Book C Pavilion, Mei Clan's junior sister, that's Master's voice. You should hurry up and go. Yes. Mei Wanxi's eyebrows also lit up with joy. Ning Chongxian was very strict with his disciples. If she returned without any results, although it wasn't her fault, she was afraid of being punished. Mei Wanxi came to the 12th floor of the palace through the formation door. She raised her head and saw Zhang Yan sitting in the main hall. White mist like snow swirled around his body, but she couldn't see his face clearly. Facing this famous Uncle Master, she didn't dare to be the slightest bit rude. She stepped forward and said, Martial nephew Mei Wanxi greets Uncle Master Zhang. This time, under Master Ning's order, I've come here to borrow the 5-spirit white carp shuttle from Uncle Master Zhang. Zhang Yan nodded and smiled. Senior brother Ning has helped me many times in the past. Even if we don't mention this matter, I'll borrow a magic weapon from him for the sake of being from the same sect. He stretched out his hand and pointed. A magic weapon shaped like a fish shuttle with silver scales flashing all over flew into Mei Wanxi's hand. Mei Wanxi couldn't help but be happy. She carefully put the magic weapon into the fragrance bag and said, Thank you Uncle Master Zhang. Master Ning is still waiting for Martial nephew to report. Martial nephew won't stay here for long. Zhang Yan nodded and said, Since senior brother Ning is waiting, you should return quickly. Yenny is fast, I'll send you off. Mei Wanxi hurriedly thanked him. After bidding farewell to Zhang Yan, she was led out of the formation door by Lu Yenny. Lu Yenny took her hand and flew away in a clear light. After the girl left, Zhang Yan stood up from the couch and stepped into the small pot mirror. In a flash, he entered the forbidden formation. As early as the 15th month, he had already successfully deduced the earth element true light. Perhaps it was because there were no interruptions during this period, This deduction was incomparably smooth. Over the past month, he had been revising and practicing this incantation. Now, he wanted to find someone to test out the power of these two Dao techniques. For more than a year, He had spent his time in the forbidden formation. Other than breathing and adjusting his breath, there was nothing else to do. Suddenly hearing someone coming, he immediately stopped his practice and jumped up from the ground. He stared and saw that it was Zhang Yan coming over on an auspicious cloud. He shouted, "Zhang Yan, how come it's you? I thought it was your disciple again." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Recently, I've practiced a Dao technique. I'm here to ask Brother Xiao for advice." He curled his lips and said disdainfully, "Don't brag. We haven't seen each other for 2 years. What kind of skill can you practice?" Although he said that he didn't take it seriously, he was extremely vigilant in his heart and didn't dare to be careless. Zhang Yan also didn't want to argue with He, so he gently shook his shoulder. Suddenly, there was a loud sound, and a clear and cold water light rose from his back, followed by the sound of a waterfall. He's eyes narrowed, and a hint of vigilance appeared on his face. He couldn't tell what kind of Dao technique this was, but he could feel the endless water vapor blowing towards him. He had practiced the mysterious water method for a long time and had never been at a disadvantage in this way. Therefore, he didn't want to be outdone and activated the Dan evil. In just a moment, boundless waves rose from his body, stirring up turbulent waves dozens of feet high. Under his control, they rolled forward with a loud rumble. Zhang Yan stood motionless in the void with his sleeves behind his back. The water element light behind him flashed again and again. No matter how much the raging waves surged towards him, it was as if they had fallen into a bottomless ravine. No matter how much they came, they were all absorbed, unable to shake him in the slightest. When He saw that Zhang Yan didn't use the Dan evil to block or retreat, he was shocked at first, but then he seemed to come to his senses. His face suddenly turned red, and he flew into a rage. He pointed at Zhang Yan and scolded, "Zhang Yan, you're using the advantage of a forbidden formation to fight me. It's fine if your disciple uses this method, but you're also a core transformation cultivator, yet you're using this method to fool me. Do you have any shame? I'm not convinced." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "There's no need for me to activate a formation when I'm fighting with you. It's just that you don't know my mysterious technique." How could He believe him? However, since his attack was futile, he no longer took the initiative to attack. He formed a hand seal, and a wall of water appeared out of thin air in front of him to protect himself. Just now, he was relying on this method to stop Zhang Yan from attacking his inner circle with his flying sword, and now he was using the same trick again. Zhang Yan was startled, but he shook his body lightly, as if something had cracked. A vigorous sound like the beating of a drum rang out, and an apricot yellow light screen flew out from behind him. This yellow light screen flew into the air, and suddenly gathered in the middle, converging into one, and fell onto the water wall. A loud sound was heard, and the wall of water in front of He shattered with a loud bang. He didn't have time to dodge and was swept by the yellow light. He couldn't help but cry out. In a split second, the water wave was broken, and his whole body was swept hundreds of feet away like a broken cloth bag. He had already fainted. When Zhang Yan saw that the power of this earth element true light was so great that it broke the wall of black water almost effortlessly, he was also shocked. He pondered for a moment and realized that it was probably because of the mutual restraint of the 5 elements. After pondering for a long time, he withdrew the true light and ordered the mirror spirit, "Take Xiao Ju and tie him up. In another month, the sex competition will be held. If Xiao comes, give him to him. What he wants to do, there's no need to care. If you like this work, please come to Chidian to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Book C Pavilion, target equals _blank. Chapter 3:14. After receiving Zhang Yan's order, the mirror spirit did not dare to hesitate. She immediately tied up He's whole body with the Yunyang gold lock and stuck the talisman on his forehead. Because she was afraid that he had a secret method to escape, she still felt that it was not enough, so she used the white mud to close the door of his 7 orifices. Only then did she put him in the palace cell and wait for Xiao Yi to come to pick him up. Possession was extremely dangerous. A little carelessness could lead to the death of one's soul. Even if one was fully prepared, it was not certain that he would succeed. The reason why Zhang Yan agreed to Xiao Yi was that he wanted to see how far he could go. However, even if this person was lucky enough to succeed, he would have to start from the beginning and spend hundreds of years to refine his cultivation again. Only then would he be qualified to talk to him. Just now, he did not ask any more after he had given his instructions. He stood in the main hall with his hands behind his back, looking at the stone plate opposite him. This object was called the Zaiyu plate, which was used to observe the time and qi in this cave. On it, there were the heavenly stems and earthly branches, the changes of the 12 seasons, the movements, and the weather of the 4 seasons. With just a glance, Zhang Yan knew that in another 31 days, it would be the sect competition. He paced back and forth in the abode as he pondered with rapt attention. Now that he had achieved initial success in the 2 rays of the mysterious true light, even though he knew that he had the strength to fight against the top 10 disciples, he still felt that it was slightly insufficient. He thought to himself, the top 10 disciples are all extraordinary. If I want to fight against them, I can't hold back at all, and I have to use my full strength. His eyes flickered slightly and he said to himself, it seems that it is time to use that object. After making up his mind, he waved his sleeves and stepped into the small pot mirror. With a wave of ripples on the surface of the mirror, he entered the world inside the mirror. This place was not like the outside world. There was no change in temperature, only green and peach blossoms. Spring flowers were in full bloom, and the fragrance assailed his nostrils. He stepped on the gravel path and walked forward. Peach petals flew and fell in profusion, which was very beautiful. However, he had no time to enjoy it at the moment and came to the side of the pond. Stop just now. After looking at the water for a while, he flicked his sleeves and pointed with his finger. The surface of the water surged up like boiling water. Not long later, a ferocious-looking beast appeared. The enormous black tortoise floated to the surface of the water. This black tortoise had the neck of a phoenix and the head of a camel. It had the legs of a centipede and the paws of a tiger. It was covered in scales and there were thick webs between its toes. It carried a huge shell on its back that looked like a mound. It also looked like a large inverted bowl with strange patterns and diagrams on it. However, at this moment, its eyes were closed and it was silent. It was obvious that it had been dead for a long time. This was the remains of the great demon, Gui Tsonga. After all, he was a great demon that had cultivated for thousands of years, so this body was extremely precious. If he could ask a refiner to refine it, he would definitely be able to create a top-notch magic treasure. Back then, Gui Tsongyao had made a promise with Zhang Yan. If the latter could help him to free himself, he would give his body to him. However, because he was afraid that the other old demons would covet after his death, he had arranged a talisman on him. After using Zhang Yan's sword to disarm him, he sent it back to the small pot mirror and kept it until now. Zhang Yan had originally planned to use this body to refine a magic treasure. However, at this moment, he didn't lack magic treasures in his hands, so he didn't need it at the moment. Instead of letting this thing collect dust, he might as well take it out to help him achieve Shen-Qi. With a command of his mind, a clear and melodious sound rang out. A crystal-clear jade scroll that looked like it was condensed from a beautiful jade flew out. When it saw the corpse of the black tortoise, it was like a mosquito seeing blood. It was extremely happy and let out a loud and clear whistle. It circled in the air and turned into a stream of light. It drilled into the aperture of the nose and entered the huge body. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, sat on a rock beside the pond and watched quietly, not moving an inch. Suddenly, a day and a night passed. He saw that the body of the black tortoise had only shrunk a little, and he sighed in his heart. As expected of the body of a great demon. Even the 9-absorption demon vanquishing talisman wasn't an easy thing to absorb all the blood essence of this body. Since it was like this, he simply didn't care about it. He closed his eyes and went to adjust his breathing. After another 18 days, the magic slip had just now completely absorbed the flesh and blood of the black tortoise. Only a shell was left there, and no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't do anything to it. After circling a few times unwillingly, the magic slip flew towards Zhang Yan. However, it flew unsteadily as if it was too nutritious and had become fat from swallowing too much, and it wasn't as agile as it was before. Zhang Yan smiled and raised his finger. With the help of the magic slip, the jade slip let out a happy cry and turned into a ray of light that drilled into the space between his eyebrows. As soon as it entered his body, it couldn't wait to feed the overflowing essence qi back to him. In Zhang Yan's spirit watchtower, there was a mass of qi that had been dormant for a long time. At this time, after being nourished by the essence qi, it was like a sleepy worm that had been awakened. In an instant, it broke out of the membrane, and with a slight tremble, it desperately absorbed the essence qi into its body and rapidly grew. When it couldn't grow any more, the mass of qi suddenly spat out and transferred an endless amount of essence qi to his 4 limbs and 100 meridians. After this spat out, the mass of qi shrank inwards, and then it sucked with all its might, pulling the essence qi back and expanding again. In between this inhalation and exhalation, the essence qi circulated around his body, caressing the acupoints and rubbing the joints. Every acupoint in Zhang Yan's body started to throb, and his joints also made cracking sounds. At first, it was unbearably numb, then it was hot and swollen, as if boiling water had been poured into it. After that, even the pores on the ends of his hair felt as if they were being scorched by smoke. Not only that, even his internal organs, as the essence qi flowed in and out, seemed to be repeatedly combed by countless delicate hands. After a long time, his skin was also red like fire, and his ears looked as if they were smeared with vermilion blood. Smoke rose from all of his pores, and the top of his head was even more dense like a steamer basket. These smoke clouds didn't dissipate, but turned into strands that wrapped around his body. Not long after, his entire body was wrapped in thick fog. From afar, he looked like a white cocoon about 10 feet tall, and his specific appearance could no longer be seen. Another 9 days passed like this, and Zhang Yan suddenly opened his eyes with a clear shout. In his inky black eyes, there was a spark of light that flashed like a star. He stretched out his finger, and with a flick, the white smoke surrounding his body exploded and dispersed with a rumble. He slowly stood up from the rock, then raised his fist and clenched it. As his spine trembled, the soles of his feet also trembled slightly. Suddenly he heard a kacha sound. When he looked down, he realized that when he circulated his strength just now, he had unknowingly shattered the rock under his feet. He raised his eyebrows, stood where he was, and lightly breathed in and out a few times. When he stepped out again, there was no longer any abnormality. He thought for a moment, then made a hand sign. A pair of bumpy golden hammers flew out, circled in the air, and came whistling down on his head. There were only 2 muffled bangs, and the 2 golden hammers didn't even shake his body before they bounced off. Zhang Yan nodded slightly, a look of satisfaction on his face. With the help of the blood essence of this great demon's body, he had now stepped into the 3rd realm of the spirit understanding contract. In comparison, his current physical body was equivalent to a strength path cultivator who had cultivated to the core transformation realm. Not only was his skin, flesh, tendons, and bones unafraid of knives and axes, even his internal organs were forged together. Even if there were divine weapons such as hammers and maces that fiercely attacked him, they wouldn't be able to harm his foundation. He turned around, raised his hand, and the turtle shell sank back into the water. This thing was so solid that even the 9 subduing magic slip couldn't do anything to it. In the future, it could also be refined into a treasure. However, there was no time to take care of it now, so he could only hide it. It was just that after doing so much, he seemed to feel that it was not enough. After thinking for a moment, he thought to himself, when I was chatting with Senior Brother Qi in the past, he once said that there were a few magic weapons in the sect that were good at trapping people. Once you are trapped by it, if you don't surrender, it can be refined in a moment. Among the top 10 disciples, there is no guarantee that one of them has such a magic weapon. I have to be careful. Thinking of this, he said loudly, Where is the mirror spirit? Go and bring me the Jing Luo Dun Jun Bao Yu. The mirror spirit listened to the order and immediately went to open the treasure house. She personally put the treasure clothes on a jade plate and brought it up. This treasure clothes was a set. Not only there was a robe and a crown, but there were also shoes, silk ribbons, and a horsetail whisk. It was one of the 2 magical weapons left by Gui Zongyao. This old demon was kind by nature. All the magic weapons that he carried with him were not used to hurt people, but mainly for defense. Zhang Yan reached out his hand and took the crown, belt, and robe. He used his mind to look inside and saw that the true sense was as clear as water, without any impurities. It was obvious that it had never been refined by anyone before, so it was as clear as a newborn baby. But thinking about it carefully, Gui Zongyao was originally a heavenly abode great demon, and he was a black tortoise. There were very few people in the world who could hurt him, so of course he didn't need this item, and he might have gotten it from somewhere. In this case, it was easy to do. Zhang Yan asked for the sacrificial formula from the mirror spirit. He took out a drop of blood and began to refine it. With the proper formula in hand, he didn't need to spend any more effort to refine it. It only took a few hours to completely refine it. He stroked the treasured robe with his palm and cast a spell into it. The robe, crown, belt, and shoes flew into the air and covered his body. In an instant he was fully dressed. He cast another spell and the horsetail whisk and Rui were put into the robe. He stood up and opened his arms to take a look. There was a constellation pattern on the robe, a cloud pattern talisman, and it faintly emitted a bright light. There was even a clear qi circulating around it. With one look, one could tell that it was not an ordinary item. It was completely different from the 7-star sun-binding robe that could change its color and shape. Although it looked a little eye-catching, it was nothing compared to its protection. Moreover, during the competition, there might be someone who wore something more eye-catching than him, so he didn't need to worry too much. Now, he was wearing the 7-star sun-binding robe that he got from Shaohan, and the Jing Luo Dun Jun Bao Yu robe on the outside. In addition to his body that was as hard as metal, he was already full of confidence. He was just waiting to show off his talent in the competition. After he stayed in the small pot mirror for another day, he retreated from it. At this moment, his heart skipped a beat. He smiled and waved his hand. From outside, a ray of light shot towards him. It was the return of the 5 spirits' white carp shuttle. He raised his sleeve and let it fall into his sleeve. Then he sat on the jade couch and waited for the day of the competition to arrive. Target equals _blank. Chapter 315. In the west of the great lake of Longyuan, a crescent moon was hanging high in the sky. The night breeze was blowing gently. 2 cultivators in long robes stood on the top of the mountain and drank from each other. One of them had a face full of stubble and his clothes were greasy, making him look rather sloppy. He held a jug of wine in his hand and drank from it from time to time, but his eyes were clear and didn't show the slightest hint of intoxication. He looked at the chilly and clear surface of the water, then looked at the reflection of the moon in the water that was ceaselessly shattering, and he couldn't help but sigh in disappointment. Time flies, 24 years have passed in a flash, and it's time for the sect competition again. Junior brother Luo, I'm afraid I'll have to experience your brilliant moves again. The man standing on the opposite peak was handsome and elegant, with his sleeves fluttering in the wind. He was Luo Qingyu, who ranked 8th among the top 10 disciples of Zhenrenyan. He looked up at the bright moon above his head and said, I wonder what tricks senior brother Zhou will teach me today? Senior martial brother Zhou shook his head repeatedly and said with a wry smile, Junior martial brother Luo, why do you have to push me aside? It's not like you don't know that I, your senior martial brother, am a good-for-nothing. I'm afraid my clansmen will scold me for being trash again. Luo Qingyu frowned slightly and then looked at him seriously. He said in a low voice, Senior brother Zhou, don't belittle yourself. With your aptitude and cultivation, if you can pull yourself together, it's hard to say who will be the winner. Senior martial brother Zhou chuckled. He didn't care about the dust on the peak and just sat on the rock lazily. He said, Junior martial brother Luo, why are you testing me? I didn't have this intention 100 years ago. Otherwise, why would I give up the position of the top 10 disciples? Now, I just want to live the rest of my life in peace. Luo Qingyu shook his head and sighed. Then he asked, is it worth it for a female demon? Senior brother Zhou suddenly became excited and clenched his fists, as if he was about to argue. He opened his mouth but didn't say anything. He just drank a few mouthfuls of wine and wiped his mouth. He suddenly raised his head and said, Junior brother, I almost fell into your trap. Don't try to provoke me. Luo Qingyu smiled faintly, then looked straight at him and said, no matter what. When the time comes, I, your junior brother, will definitely not show any mercy. So, you must be careful, senior brother. Senior brother Zhou suddenly burst into laughter, appearing extremely wild and unruly. He said, Junior brother Luo, although I have no intention of fighting with you, I haven't lived long enough. Although I can't beat you, if you want to kill me, you can't. It's not easy. Luo Qingyu waved his sleeves and said coldly, I'll see you at the contest. Then he leaped into the air, turned into a light green cloud and flew away. Senior brother Zhou raised the wine cup in his hand. He saluted the wisp of smoke and then poured it into his mouth. He let the wine drench his hair and beard, and when he was hit by the cold water, he felt a chill down his spine. He shook his head and his eyes suddenly lit up. However, a moment later, he seemed to have thought of something and sighed heavily. The light in his eyes gradually dimmed. In the Honglai continent, there were ravines and dangerous peaks everywhere. At this time, in the sky, tens of thousands of celestial flying boats were heading here. Under the night sky, the stars were like rain. There were many disciples in the Yinsong sect. Usually, they were scattered on the various islands of the Dragon Abyss Great Marsh to cultivate. Among the disciples of the same sect, there were many who had never met each other in their entire lives. But today, for the sect competition, they had rushed over from all directions, like 100 rivers flowing into the sea, gathering in one place. The first 20 days of the contest were for the disciples of Ming Qi. The Upper Brightness Courtyard, the Merit Courtyard, the Spiritual Mechanism Courtyard, and the Zhengqing Courtyard would each send a few elders to judge. Finally, 60 winners would be chosen. They would be bestowed with the Qi residence of the True Palace, magical weapons, pills, secret manuals, and could even go to the Upper Brightness Courtyard to listen to the elders discuss Tao and ask questions about Tao. But if it was a true disciple, this was not the case. Those who did not enter the top 10 would not be bestowed anything and would also have all the bestowed spirit shells for these 24 years deducted. At this time, the Wang sisters and Tian Kuan were also sitting on the flying boat. They pressed on the side of the boat and flew towards the Honglai continent. They saw the treasures flying everywhere, like flowing lights dancing in the sky and stars twinkling in the sky. They could not help but feel dazzled. The contest in the school was held every 24 years. Not only could they observe the skills of their fellow disciples and learn from each other's strong points to make up for their weaknesses, it could also motivate the disciples and arouse their competitive spirit. Therefore, Zhang Yan did not demand that his disciples cultivate in the cave and allowed them to come here to observe. Moreover, Lu Yinyi was also going to participate in the contest this time. According to Zhang Yan's judgment, with this disciple's current strength, even if there were opponents in the same generation, there would be few. It was just the right time for the Wang sisters and Tian Kuan to see the gap between them and their eldest senior sister. Wang Kating had been cultivating in the heavenly lake of clear nether for close to 3 years. Although her lively and active personality had been restrained quite a bit, it would be a lie to say that she was not bored. Now that she was outside and saw this rare sight, she kept tugging on Tian Kuan's sleeve and shaking it, occasionally letting out cries of surprise and praise. However, this action did not raise any eyebrows because there were many people like her. Most of the Ming Qi disciples were juniors who had not entered the Tao for a long time and had yet to completely adapt to the long and boring path of cultivation. Their minds were also the most lively. Usually, they were trapped in the sect and could not go out. Now that they suddenly had the chance to escape, they were all extremely excited. Wang Kaiwei was different from her sister. After taking a few glances, she could not help but be secretly shocked and said, "Usually, I never thought that there would be so many fellow disciples in my Qinsong school. And this is only my Qinsong sect. The East Hua continent is so big, I don't know how many cultivators there are. Looking at the unfamiliar faces, she felt an inexplicable pressure in her heart. It could be imagined that these people would be her opponents in the future. If she wanted to achieve the Tao, she had to stand out from these people, or in other words, kill her way to the world. Just now thinking about this, she suddenly heard a cold voice in her mind, "Kai Wei, you don't have to worry. If you don't like these people, I'll just kill them all for you." Wang Kai Wei was instantly shocked and hurriedly replied in her heart, "No, Sister Yin, please don't mess around." Over the past year, the Yin Slayer's saber spirit had also come out a few times to guide her in cultivation. She had also benefited a lot. Originally, Wang Kating's cultivation was faster than hers, but later on, she gradually caught up and now surpassed her by a lot. This made Wang Kating very unhappy and often said that she was shameless. After a few conversations with the saber spirit, Wang Kaiwei vaguely knew the origin of this saber. Her heart was both surprised and worried. Later on, the mirror spirit in the cave specially came to tell her that this saber spirit had been injured and had forgotten many things of the past. At this moment, it was like a blank piece of paper. As long as she treated it carefully, there was no need to worry too much. However, this saber was after all a weapon of slaughter. Therefore, she was advised not to use it unless it was absolutely necessary, lest it aroused the hidden ferocity in the saber spirit and brought disaster for no reason. Thus, when she heard the saber spirit casually say that it wanted to kill these disciples, how could she not be anxious? However, no one could bear the consequences. She continuously used a lot of strength in her heart, and just now, she was able to calm it down. At this moment, a flying boat flew over. On the boat, there was a cultivator dressed like a scholar. He held a folding fan in his hand and lightly waved it. When he saw the two beautiful women, his eyes couldn't help but brighten up. He waved his talisman and the flying boat came closer. He cupped his hands and said, "I am Li Guizhi, cultivating under Immortal Ing Island. May I ask where my fellow disciples are cultivating?" The Wang sisters saw that he had a tall and imposing appearance and was dressed in the robes of a radiant Qi cultivator. His cultivation was higher than theirs, so they hurriedly bowed. Tian Kuan was the senior brother, so he should be the one to respond. However, he had always been a man of few words, so he only cupped his hands and ignored them. Wang Kaiwei glanced at him, and to avoid being rude, she took the initiative to answer, "So it's a senior brother from Immortal Ing Island. My sister and senior brother are all cultivating under Clear Nether Lake." Wang Kaiwei was originally from one of the 9 cities, so she had heard of many famous disciples in the sect. She had even heard of the immortal caves that they lived in. Afterwards, when she entered Clear Nether Lake, she heard Lu Yenny talk about it quite a bit, so she knew quite a bit about the various immortal caves. This Immortal Ing Island was one of the big islands in the Great Longyan Lake. Lu Yenny had lived there with her uncle for a few years, and it was rumored that the island lord was Meng Zhen's grand disciple. Thus, she didn't dare to underestimate it. Clear Nether Lake? Li Guizhi felt that it sounded familiar, and his expression changed. He blurted out, "Is it Zhang? Master Zhang's disciple?" He was originally the disciple of Immortal Ing Island's lord, but Zhang Yan and Qi Yuntian called each other senior and junior brother. According to this, he would have to call him senior granduncle, and the two beautiful girls in front of him would also have to call him senior uncle. He really couldn't bring himself to lower himself by a generation, so he could only use Master Zhang to avoid the awkwardness. Little sister is indeed Master Zhang's disciple. Wang Kating immediately responded. Speaking of her master, she couldn't help but feel proud. Her chin was slightly raised, and her neck revealed a hint of blush. Because of Zhang Yan's reputation, Li Guizhi subconsciously cupped his hands again, and his words and actions became more cautious. After exchanging a few words with Wang Shi, he found out their names. He looked at Tian Kuan and said warmly, "Junior brother Tian, are you also here to participate in the grand competition?" His eyes weren't bad, and he could tell that the two girls hadn't opened their meridians. Only Tian Kuan had entered the Clear Qi stage and was qualified to compete for the rankings. Tian Kun shook his head and said in a muffled voice, "Little brother doesn't have such intentions." Li Guizhi smiled lightly, waved his fan, and said, "That's true. Master Zhang's disciples naturally don't need to work as hard as us." If someone else said they didn't want to compete for the rankings, he would definitely find it strange. But since they were Zhang Yan's disciples, it was reasonable. One had to know that Clear Nether Lake was a paradise. In the Great Swallow Longyan, besides the 10 spiritual masters, no one could enter such a paradise to cultivate. Besides, Zhang Yan was the disciple of Zhou Changju of the Danding Courtyard, so he naturally didn't lack pills. Only the sex cultivation method was somewhat attractive, but it wasn't the 5 techniques and 3 scriptures. In Li Guizhi's opinion, Zhang Yan's cultivation was profound, and he was skilled in the art of flying swords. After returning from overseas, he must have obtained some incredible cultivation method. Otherwise, how could he be so powerful as to defeat Tu Xian, Xiao He, and the others? Therefore, Tian Kun and the Wang sisters probably didn't think much of the cultivation method bestowed by the sect. After thinking about it, he also felt extremely envious. He couldn't help but sigh. No matter how hard we cultivate, we still can't find a good master. Target equals _blank. Chapter 316. The terrain of the Honglai continent was peculiar. Mountains surrounded and arched around it, rising up to a height of 100 feet from the surface of the sea. There was a basin in the middle. At this moment, it was the time for the grand competition. Thus, there was a huge decorated archway that was 30 feet tall erected in all 4 directions. Behind the decorated archway, there were many gates. If the disciples of the sect passed through, they would be led to the pavilions in the mountains, where they would have their own seats and wouldn't be crowded together. When the Wang sisters and Li Guizhi arrived, they heard the sound of a golden bell in the distance. It was pleasing to the ear and soothing to the heart. The chiming sound came from afar, and rainbow lights danced in the sky. Auspicious colors dyed the clouds, auspicious lights lingered, and spiritual birds and flying boats came and went. When they arrived in front of the mountain, a Taoist riding a white crane came to welcome them. He bowed and said, "May I ask where my fellow disciples came from? I can arrange the seating arrangements." Now that the disciples of the various sects and islands had arrived, the supervising disciples in charge of leading the way were also very busy. However, all the disciples couldn't be treated the same. There had to be a hierarchy. If they came from a famous master, they would be given a good pavilion. Not only would they be able to watch the disciples fight, they would also be able to bring servants and maids to serve them well. In short, they wouldn't be mistreated. As for those who weren't famous and didn't come from any powerful cultivators, they could only be arranged to have 10s of them gather together, barely sharing a pavilion. Because of this, there wasn't much comfort to speak of. There might even be disciples who didn't get along with each other, but these weren't within the considerations of the supervising Taoist. If they broke the sect's rules, they could order a strong man to ask them to leave. This was also the first time Li Guizhi came to watch the competition. He had heard about the rules from his fellow sect members. He was a person of status and didn't want to be looked down upon by the Wang sisters and Tian Kun. He also saw that this Taoist cultivation wasn't much lower than his, so he took the initiative and said, "I'm a disciple of Immortal Ing Island's Master Yu. I hope that the supervising Taoist can arrange a good place for us to go." "So you're from Immortal Ing Island?" When the supervising Taoist heard his words, he glanced at him and lazily threw over a talisman. He pointed behind him and said, "Do you see the flag gate at the DUI position? You can go here with this talisman. Go quickly." This, Li Guizhi's expression couldn't help but change. He was placed in the west seat? Moreover, this talisman didn't look like a good place to go. He took a deep breath. He then said, "This deacon, can you change to another one? I'm a disciple of Immortal Ing Island. My master is Yu Jian Qing Yao, a disciple of Meng Zhen." He was afraid that the Taoist did not know his background. Who knew that after hearing this, the Taoist frowned and looked at him, an impatient look on his face. He snorted and urged the crane under him. She ignored him and went into the distance. Li Guozhi was thrown to the ground and was stunned. Wang Keting's mind was lively and she immediately understood what was going on. But when she saw Li Guozhi's embarrassed expression, she thought it was very amusing and giggled. He teased, "Senior brother Li, it's like the talisman in your hand. Can we go to a good pavilion?" Wang Kaiwei pulled her and looked at her with a reproachful look. She turned to Li Guozhi and said, "Senior brother Li, my sister is speaking nonsense. Don't take it to heart." Li Guozhi's face heated up and he could only smile bitterly. Tian Kuan said, "Isn't it the same no matter where we go? Why do we have to be so particular?" Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, "Second senior brother is right. We are disciples of the mysterious sect, not those weak people who can't bear to be wronged. We've already lived through 3 years of hardship. Why would we care about a mere seat?" When Li Guozhi heard this, he felt a bit ashamed. However, this matter involved his master's reputation, so it wasn't appropriate for him to say anything. He could only remain silent and nod at the three. He glanced at the talisman, then turned the flying boat around and headed for the exchange flag gate. The attendant Taoist left with an unhappy expression. Not long after, a white-robed Taoist came up and proudly raised the item in his hand. He said, "Pai Rong, what do you think this is?" The attendant Taoist took a look and immediately widened his eyes. He cried out in surprise, "Cloud? Cloud sand? How did you get it?" This cloud sand was plump and could be considered to be not bad. If he used it to trade, he could get at least 1,000 spirit shells. His eyes turned red from looking at it. The white-robed Taoist deliberately waved it in front of him a few more times before putting it away. He said complacently, "I just sent a member of the Chun clan into the mountain. He heard that my surname is also Chin. He saw that I served him well, so he casually tossed me this. Hee, this time I can go to the 9 cities and have fun for a while." Disciples like them had only randomly found a few waste ponds to open their meridians. They didn't expect to achieve much in this life, so they had long since given up on cultivation. However, they could still eat, drink, and play in the 9 cities. They could enjoy their wealth and be above everyone else. However, they didn't have many sources of income and were usually very poor. Today, they were called over to serve the disciples and thought that it was a lucrative job. Of course, they wanted to earn some money. A member of the Chun clan, one of the 5 big clans. "Brother Chin, you are really lucky." The attendant Taoist's face was full of envy. He then said angrily, "Why didn't I also meet someone from an influential clan? I only met a bunch of poor bastards." The white-robed Taoist looked at him and asked curiously, "What's wrong? Could it be that you didn't meet someone with money?" The deacon Taoist was filled with resentment as he said, "Don't mention it. In this half a day, I've received tens of people consecutively, but I haven't seen a single one that looked good. Just now, I met a person who looked rather extravagant. Initially, I thought he was a member of some aristocratic family, so I went to greet him excitedly. Who knew that this person would say that he was a disciple of Immortal Ing Island? Could it be that I don't know that Island Lord Meng Zhen is my grand disciple? However, this person has cultivated for hundreds of years and is only at the mystic light realm. It's hard to say if Meng Zhen still remembers him, so I gave him a position exchange talisman. If he gave me some good stuff, I might have exchanged it for him. However, I didn't expect him to be so ignorant, so I didn't bother with him anymore." When the white-robed Taoist heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. Then he couldn't help but look back. His eyes were very good, and apart from Li Guozhi, he immediately saw the Wang sisters. At first, he didn't pay much attention, but his expression changed slightly. He took a few steps closer and finally saw clearly. He exclaimed, "Pai Rong, do you want to die?" The deacon Taoist frowned. He scolded, "Chingu, don't provoke me." The white-robed Taoist grabbed the crane rope in his hand and said anxiously, "Quick, follow me, we can still make it." The deacon Taoist was baffled and stopped him. "Hold on, make yourself clear." The white-robed Taoist glared at him and pulled him up. "There's no time, let's talk as we walk." He hurriedly urged the red-crowned crane under him. Then they started walking. The deacon Taoist felt strange. However, he knew that the other party wouldn't play tricks on him, so he didn't insist and followed. He heard the white-robed Taoist say, "I know those two girls too, they're the daughter and daughter of the Wang clan in Jiao City." The deacon Taoist twitched his mouth. He said, "They're just a rich family in the city, so what if they're from a big clan? Look at how anxious you are." The white-robed Taoist laughed coldly. "The Wang sisters aren't much, and the Wang clan isn't much either. However, the two of them have a good master." The deacon Taoist suddenly felt that something was wrong, but he still said stubbornly, "How can there be any powerful people on Immortal Ing Island?" The white-robed Taoist interrupted him. "These two Wang sisters aren't disciples of Immortal Ing. They're obviously disciples of that Zhao Yu Heavenly Lakes Manor head Zhang." When the deacon Taoist heard this, his mind buzzed. His face turned pale and his teeth chattered. You're saying that they're Zhang Yen, Manor head Zhang's disciple?" The white-robed Taoist nodded heavily. The deacon Taoist's head was covered in cold sweat. Zhang Yen was famous among the younger generation disciples. It could be said that everyone knew that the seating arrangement was inappropriate. Offending his disciple was a small matter, but if they thought that he was purposely trying to embarrass him, then that would be fatal. Thinking of this, he did not dare to dawdle here. He hurriedly leaped the red-crowned crane under him and rushed ahead of the white-robed Taoist. In a panic, he chased after the flying ship. Looking at it from afar, he anxiously shouted, "Uncle Masters, please wait, please wait." While the Wang sisters were heading towards the Honglai continent, Lu Yenyi and Qiu Hanyue were heading towards the Merit Courtyard. It wasn't time for her, a mystic light realm cultivator, to fight yet, so she still had free time to come here. When they arrived outside the Merit Courtyard, someone recognized them and immediately went in to report. Not long later, Qi Mingjiao came out with a smile and said, "Why did the two of you think of coming to see me?" Lu Yenyi smiled sweetly and said, "The competition is coming soon, so we came to stay here for a few days. This way, we won't have to run around and we can also learn from you." Qi Mingjiao welcomed the two of them into the inner room and ordered a maid to serve them tea. After some small talk, the topic changed to the sex competition. Qi Mingjiao smiled and said, "Yinny, now that you've obtained the moonless sword pellet, you'll be able to win a lot of benefits for yourself in this competition. If you win first place, the uncertain sect will pass down some minor techniques to you. However, you need to be careful of that Yuan Yanhui. I heard that she's asked many famous experts, and her swordsmanship has improved by another level." Lu Yenyi nodded silently. That day on Yingluo Island, she had lost to this woman, causing the sword pellet to be regretful. However, she was still quite unconvinced. After fighting with Xiao Bo a few times, she felt that her swordsmanship had improved greatly. She wanted to compete with him again in the competition to see who was stronger and who was weaker. Qi Mingjiao looked at her and said sincerely, "Yenny, a few days ago, I also saw your master. I saw that he was a person with great ambition, and he must want to fight for the position of the top 10 disciples. Seeing that you and I are sisters, you can go back and give your master a word of advice. However, this competition is different from the past. No matter how you fight, there might not be any results. Why not give up for now and wait until the next competition? Maybe you'll have a chance." Lu Yenyi was shocked and said, "Sister, what do you mean?" She knew that Qi Mingjiao's identity was different. This woman was Qi Yuntian's adopted disciple since she was a child, so she often knew some news that others did not. Qi Mingjiao stretched out her slender white jade-like finger and pointed upward. She said seriously, "The competition of the top 10 disciples is just a chess game played by those Taoist masters behind the scenes. Who will be the winner and who will be the loser has been decided before the competition. And this competition is related to the changes of the sect. It will be even more difficult for your master to break out of the situation. It's almost," she paused, shook her head and sighed, "it's almost impossible. Target equals, undersubject." Chapter 317. The moonless sword orb circled around the main hall a few times and shined with a bright light. With a clear shout, it returned to Lu Yenyi's side. She pointed with her slender finger, and the sword orb turned into a ball of light that was as cold as the moon. It floated 3 feet away from her without moving. Then, she bowed to Qi Mingjiao in front of her and said in a serious tone, "Thanks to Senior Sister Qi's guidance these past few days, this little sister has really benefited a lot." In the blink of an eye, 18 days had passed. In another 2 days, it would be the Mystic Light Realm Disciples competition in the sect. In these past few days, Lu Yinyi had been staying with Qi Mingjiao. This girl had been cultivating under Qi Yuntian's tutelage for 100 years, and her knowledge and cultivation were far above Lu Yinyi's. Therefore, Lu Yinyi had benefited a lot from asking Qi Mingjiao for advice. Qi Mingjiao sat on a praying mat and carefully looked at Lu Yinyi. A look of admiration appeared in her beautiful eyes as she said, "Junior sister, it's really not easy for you to cultivate the flying sword to this level with just the righteous sword scripture. I'm sure Martial Uncle Zhang is very happy to have such a good disciple. Among the people of the same generation in the sect, it's probably hard for you to find a match. As for those who are even more amazing, you'll have to wait until you reach a higher level before you can meet them." Speaking of this topic, Lu Yinyi's interest was piqued. She also sat on a praying mat and sat across from Qi Mingjiao. She asked, "This little sister knows very little about this. I'd like to ask sister, which people in my Qinsong school are famous for their swordsmanship?" Qi Mingyan raised her eyebrows and thought for a while before saying, "In terms of the best swordsmanship in our sect, it should be Luo Kitchen, Spiritual Master Luo. However, he has been in seclusion for nearly 200 years and hasn't shown himself for a long time. I've never seen him either." Next is Sun Yihe, Spiritual Master Sun. Rumor has it that his swordsmanship is on par with Spiritual Master Luo's. Other than these two, there's Luo Yuanhua, who is known as the Sword Immortal. This person is Spiritual Master Luo's son. He and Xiao Chua, one of the top 10 disciples of the sect, are disciples of Spiritual Master Han Ziyang, but that's just a title. This person is extremely obsessed with the flying sword. He is very talented and has gone to the Shaoqing sect many times to learn swordsmanship. If Martial Uncle Zhang shows himself in the competition, he will most likely come. When Lu Yinyi heard this, she couldn't help but feel slightly worried in her heart, and she thought to herself, "I didn't expect that the opponent master has to face would actually be so formidable. I wonder if he can deal with it." Although she was Zhang Yan's disciple, Zhang Yan had never fought with her, and he usually only gave her guidance verbally. With her own master's true strength, she didn't know much more than others, so it wasn't surprising for her to be worried. At this moment, Qi Mingjiao seemed to have recalled something and said, "There's another person whose swordsmanship is profound as well. His name is Xiao Guangwu, and he's Luo Yuanhua's brother-in-law. He has also received guidance from Spiritual Master Luo on many occasions. The reason why he isn't well known in the sect is mostly because he has a gentle temperament and is overshadowed by his brother. Coupled with the fact that he has been in seclusion all these years, he has been gradually forgotten. However, my master once said that we must never underestimate this person, or we will suffer greatly." Lu Yinyi nodded. As a disciple, she already wanted to go back and tell her master about what she heard here so that she could be prepared. After thinking for a moment, she asked curiously, "Just now, Senior Sister mentioned that Luo Yuanhua had once gone to the Shaoqing sect to seek guidance. Junior Sister has also heard from my master that among all the sects, only the Shaoqing sect's swordsmanship is the most brilliant. Senior Sister Qi has cultivated for a long time. I wonder how far my current swordsmanship is from the Shaoqing sect's disciples of the same generation?" Qi Mingjiao revealed a pondering expression, and she slowly said, "Master has also met many Shaoqing sect disciples in the past. In terms of swordsmanship alone, I'm afraid Junior Sister is still far inferior." Lu Yinyi was not surprised. She had not practiced swordsmanship for a long time, and she admitted that she was probably not a match for the Shaoqing sect's disciples of the same generation. However, she did not expect Qi Mingjiao to say the words far inferior. Qi Mingjiao smiled and went forward to hold her hand, comforting her, "Sister, there's no need to be depressed. The Shaoqing sect only has over 1,000 people, and they have the least number of people among the 10 sects of Shenmen. However, all of their disciples are proficient in swordsmanship. Just based on the separation and reunion technique alone, any direct disciple of the Shaoqing sect will be able to learn it. Therefore, any one of them can't be underestimated. The 10 major sects of Xianmen did not refer to the number of people, but their inheritance and strength. The reason why the Shaoqing sect could remain as the number 1 sect of Xianmen was because their disciples were the most powerful, and no one dared to stop. Moreover, the competition within the sect was also the cruelest in Xianmen. There were only around 100 direct disciples in the Shaoqing sect. If they were to compete with each other every month and over the years, those who were not strong would immediately be defeated and fall into the dust, losing their identity as direct disciples. They might even lose their lives. Lu Yinyi was also shocked after hearing Qi Mingjiao's words. She had always treated Yuan Yanhui as her greatest opponent and her target. However, after hearing about the Shaoqing sect, it was as if a door had been opened, and she saw a wider world. In that instant, her slightly impetuous state of mind suddenly calmed down, as if a layer of obstruction had been removed. It was as if she had been cleansed by clear water, and her spirit was clear. Qi Mingjiao also seemed to have sensed the changes in her body. She could not help but open her beautiful eyes and look over in surprise. After Lu Yinyi sat quietly for a moment, a slight smile suddenly appeared on her delicate face. At that moment, she felt a strange feeling in the depths of her heart, as if she had some kind of resonance with the moonless sword pill. When the feeling became clearer, her body trembled slightly, and the sword pill also trembled, giving off a buzzing sound. Then, it suddenly leaped into the air, and instantly turned into 2 balls of sword light. The 2 balls of sword light spun in the air, then merged and separated, turning into 4 balls of light that swayed in the air. At that moment, Lu Yinyi seemed to be unaware of it. Her expression was calm, and the light in her eyes was restrained. She seemed to have fallen into a strange realm, comprehending the mysterious spiritual sense that came from nowhere. Qi Mingjiao never thought that Lu Yinyi would actually be enlightened under her eyes and comprehend the light separation and reunion technique. Looking at this scene, her eyes were filled with splendor, and she was filled with emotions. But she also knew that this was the most important moment for Lu Yinyi, and she could not be disturbed in the slightest. Thus, she lightly cast a technique and closed the door of the hall. She also held her breath and concentrated, not making a single sound. The 4 balls of light flew in the air, sometimes slow and sometimes slow. After circling dozens of times, they trembled at the same time, and each of them split into a ball of light. At that moment, Lu Yinyi's eyelids trembled, and she retreated from that comprehension. She raised her head and saw the 8 sword pellets leaping around in the air. She couldn't help but reveal a slight smile at the corner of her lips. Qi Mingjiao shook her head. She could not help but sigh at Lu Yinyi's high aptitude and good luck. After listening to a speech, she actually comprehended something before the competition and broke through. She thought to herself, light separation and reunion, 8 swords in one breath. In Uncle Master Zhang's sect, there are actually 2 sword cultivators. In the future, his rise will be unstoppable. At this moment, in the clear nether heavenly lake, Zhang Yan, who was sitting on the jade couch, suddenly felt something and opened his eyes. Just now, he could faintly feel that something had changed in the body of someone close to him, but he had no way of knowing what exactly it was. He thought about it for a while. There were only 2 days left until the competition of the Xian Light Realm cultivators, and his disciple Lu Yinyi was going to fight. As her master, he had to go and watch the ceremony and support her. Thinking up to there, he stood up and stepped out of the formation door. He turned into a streak of smoke and flew toward the sect. Who knew that before he could go far, a cluster of jade-green sword lights leaped up and blocked his way. Someone said, "Sir, please wait." Zhang Yan stopped and looked up with his hands behind his back. He saw a pale-faced young Taoist standing in front of him. He looked like a weak scholar. However, that light just now was clearly a sword escape technique, so he couldn't help but be wary. He went through this person's appearance in his mind, but he still couldn't guess his identity. He said in a deep voice, "Who are you, and why are you blocking my path?" This young Taoist didn't lack etiquette. He bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "Are you senior brother Zhang Yan, Zhang Yan?" Zhang Yan raised his hand to return the bow and said, "Yes, it is me." This young Taoist coughed and revealed a humble smile. He said, "This one is Zhao Guangwu. I have been waiting for senior brother Zhang for 15 days. Zhang Yan had never heard of this person's name. When he heard that this person had been waiting for him for a long time, he raised his eyebrows and said, "Taoist Zhao is looking for me, may I ask why?" Zhao Guangwu cupped his hands in a seemingly gentle manner, and then his words contained a hint of sharpness. "I've been immersed in the Tao of the Flying Sword for many years. It's only because I heard that senior brother Zhang is also skilled in this Tao that I've come to challenge you. If I'm able to defeat senior brother by a stroke of luck, it would be able to strengthen my reputation." Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes. He immediately noticed that this person's words weren't true. Not to mention that the sword light just now had no sharpness, this person's aura, spirit, and will didn't have the slightest intention to fight. He said indifferently, "Senior brother Zhao, you don't mean what you say." Zhao Guangwu's body shook slightly, and he revealed an embarrassed expression of being exposed. He sighed in self-mockery and said, "I can't hide it from senior brother Zhang. Fine, I will tell the truth to senior brother Zhang. I have wasted 100 years in the sect, and I don't have any desire to win. This time, I was asked by someone to stop senior brother Zhang here." Zhang Yan nodded and asked, "Can you tell me this person's identity?" Zhao Guangwu shook his head lightly. Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "So, Taoist Zhao wants to fight me?" Zhao Guangwu said with a serious expression, "Senior brother Zhang, this person actually doesn't have any ill intentions towards you. He just doesn't want senior brother Zhang to make an appearance during the competition in the sect so as to avoid getting injured. Now that we've spoken up to this point, it's inconvenient for me to say anything more. If senior brother Zhang can turn back now and swear not to leave the sect until the competition ends, then I'll immediately turn around and return to the estate, and I can avoid a pointless fight between the two of us." Zhang Yan roared with laughter, and his voice was like a thunderclap as he said, "Taoist brother's words are wrong. How could I be willing to miss an expert like you to test my sword before the competition? If Taoist brother Zhao sees that person in the future, then you must thank him on my behalf." Zhao Guangwu's expression changed and he said, "Senior brother Zhang, we're all from the same sect, so why fight over and over again? It's best if we can end it peacefully." Zhang Yan's face flushed and he said, "The path to the Grand Tao is one where you fight for it, so how can it tolerate the slightest bit of dodging and giving way? Now that you're blocking my path, you're my great enemy. There's no need to say anything else. Let's see who's the real deal." As soon as he finished speaking, he urged his mind, and a sword light shot out from between his eyebrows, and it shot towards Zhao Guangwu like a flash of lightning. Target equals _blank. Chapter 318. Zhao Guangwu didn't expect Zhang Yan to make a move just like that. He couldn't help but be shocked when he heard it. In a hurry, he stepped on the smoke and retreated. At the same time, a sword pellet flew out. In an instant, it drew out a golden arc light and blocked the star's sword pellet that was flying towards him. Then, with a spell, he turned into a rainbow light and flew far away. He was also proficient in swordsmanship. When he was a disciple of Luo Qixin, he often sparred with Luo Yuanhua. He knew that when two swordsmen were fighting, if one of them made the first move, the other would not be in a hurry to counterattack. Instead, he would think of ways to get out of the battle circle and avoid the storm-like attacks. After stabilizing his footing, he would then talk about other things. Although Zhang Yan didn't know his plan, he had never fought with a swordsman like Zhao Guangwu before. Now that he suddenly encountered him, he was delighted to see a hunter and naturally wouldn't miss such a good opportunity. Even if this person made a move to give way, he wouldn't let it go easily. Similarly, he turned into a rainbow and chased after him with his sword. Two rainbow lights chased in the sky. Both were as fast as lightning and as fast as flying stars. In the blink of an eye, they were already a few miles away. Zhao Guangwu had practiced swordsmanship since he was young and was confident in his swordsmanship. In his opinion, although Zhang Yan was also famous for the oblique path, he might not be able to be mentioned in the same breath as him. That was why he was full of confidence before this. However, he was surprised to find that the speed of the other's sword escape was not much slower than his bow. In fact, it was even slightly faster. Seeing this, his gaze froze, but he didn't panic. With a shout, he urged the sword light. The escape light suddenly became fast and slow, left and right, making it hard for others to figure out where he was going. After flashing dozens of times, he arrived at the top of a mountain. Then he looked for the gaps between the rocks to pass through, and after a few rounds, he finally pulled away from the sword light behind him. Then he turned around and stood in the air. With a shout, he shook the sword pellet open, and in an instant, 12 wheels of sword light formed into a crescent moon wheel and flashed out. He had heard that Zhang Yan could use 16 swords in one breath, but he didn't think much of it. According to what he knew, Zhang Yan was the same as him. They had not learned the superior sword manual, so they couldn't fully display the power of the technique. However, he was slightly different. Not only did he know the light separation and reunion technique, he often sparred with his fellow sword cultivators when he was in the Luo clan, so he had rich battle experience. Even if he was short of a few sword beams, he was confident that he could use his exquisite sword skills to make up for it. The corner of his mouth curled up slightly. With a command of his mind, the sword rays separated and reunited, gathering and dispersing at the same time. It seemed as though it was expanding and contracting at the same time. It kept jumping around Zhang Yan's body, looking for an opportunity to attack the enemy. As long as he could find an opening, he would be able to kill his way in. Seeing that Zhao Guangwu was actually able to create 12 swords in one breath, Zhang Yan was not surprised, but happy instead. He exclaimed in his heart, and with a clear whistle, he also spread out his sword light. A total of 16 sword shadows flew out at the same time, transforming into streaks of dancing light that protected him. It was rare to meet a fellow practitioner. He wanted to observe the person's sword skills, so he wasn't in a rush to attack. He only focused on defense. Now that he was wearing treasured clothes and had cultivated the divine contract to the third realm, even if his opponent had a killer move, he was not afraid of killing him. Seeing that Zhang Yan was trapped by him, Zhao Guangwu couldn't help but look happy. He and Zhang Yan were from the same sect, and they didn't invite each other with a duel invitation. This battle could only be considered as a spar, and he wouldn't be able to explain who was injured. Therefore, he only hoped that he could defeat Zhang Yan and force him to admit defeat. With that, Zhang Yan wouldn't have the face to compete for victory in the tournament. Therefore, he did not hesitate to instigate his true essence and drove the sword pill like rain. A golden rain-like brilliance wrapped around a layer of starlight and poured down from every orifice, as if it was trying its best to crush it. Although the shuttle-like starlight was a size smaller than the resplendent silver light, it was extremely tenacious. Under the constant pressure, it repeatedly changed shape. Although it looked like charcoal and was in danger, it was still able to deal with it. The two colors of brilliance collided with each other and created a pleasing sound. It was like the sound of a zither and could be heard dozens of miles away. Unknowingly, an hour had passed in this battle between the two. Zhang Yan's breathing was long and continuous, and his dan was vigorous, but he did not feel anything. On the other hand, Zhao Guangwu was unable to break through the net of swords several times. Entering the net of swords, he felt slightly tired. He was secretly shocked and said, "This Zhang Yan is still calm and composed, and does not seem to be strained at all. I heard that he has achieved the first grade of his dan. Is the after effect really so endless?" When he controlled the sword light like this, his mind and the sword pill were in harmony, and he purely used the mind's eye and sword consciousness to find the enemy's flaws. Although the sword light was erratic and unpredictable, and he could take the initiative, he hadn't cultivated it to the state of perfect harmony. He had to first stand in one place and not be distracted in the slightest. Only then would he be able to unleash the greatest power. Once the sword light flew up, it would be as fast as lightning. In an instant, it could send out dozens or hundreds of swords. It needed to be in harmony with the sword consciousness, and he couldn't care about anything else. However, if he flew back and forth, the sword that he sent out would not go where he wanted it to go. If it was just a little bit higher, he wouldn't be able to talk about suppressing the enemy. Moreover, it wasn't easy to use 12 swords in one breath. Instead, it was an extremely heavy burden. Therefore, some sword cultivators in Shaoqing sect, even if they knew the method of splitting light, only liked to focus on one sword and didn't abuse this move, in case they used up too much of their vitality and were turned around. At this moment, Zhao Guangwu could feel the pill evil within his body rapidly dissipating. He was well aware that if he continued to struggle like this, if he was still unable to suppress Zhang Yan, it would be the other party's turn to deal with him after a while. However, before he could come up with a plan to deal with the enemy, Zhang Yan had already felt that this person seemed to be unable to continue. His gaze flickered slightly, and he increased the power of his sword. Blue light flashed randomly, forcing back the golden light that wrapped around him, as if it was about to burst. Zhao Guangwu couldn't help but be surprised. Compared to before, Zhang Yan's sword light was much more experienced. With Zhang Yan's method of 16 swords in one breath, it wasn't that he couldn't do many sword moves. It was just that he didn't fight and couldn't imagine it out of thin air. He originally had great potential for growth, but after practicing with Zhao Guangwu, he had a new understanding and understood many mysteries. Zhao Guangwu also understood that if he couldn't take down this person in one stroke, continuing to fight like this was purely for his opponent to train his swordsmanship. His mind changed, and he decided to change to another method. Therefore, he used the sword pill and jumped out of the battle circle. He was the main attacker, so of course he would retreat when he said so. When he was far away, he sheathed his sword and stood there, sighing. "I can't stop Senior Brother Zhang, so this battle is meaningless. Senior Brother, please go." He dodged to the side and pretended to be magnanimous to make way. Zhang Yan scoffed coldly. "Dao Brother Zhao sure is relaxed. You blocked my path for no reason, and now you want to leave. Do you think I'm easy to bully?" He pointed with his hand, and the sword light lengthened to attack Zhao Guangwu again. Zhao Guangwu frowned. He had a sword concealment technique that could hide him from the side and suddenly attack. However, he had to wait for the right time to use this technique. If the other party was on guard, it wouldn't be easy to use it. He originally planned to use words to scare Zhang Yan into thinking that he was really retreating, and when he was careless, he would make a surprise attack. He didn't expect the other party to not fall for it. Seeing the sword light coming, he had no choice but to pull himself together to deal with it. This time, Zhang Yan didn't plan to hold back. The sword light collided, and after blocking the other's body, he continued to unleash his sword force. Zhao Guangwu wasn't in the mood to fight for a long time. After he dealt with a few moves, he found a flaw and used the same trick again to escape. However, how could Zhang Yan let him escape so easily? He had only wanted to take a look at his sword move, so he didn't use his full strength. Now that he saw that the other wanted to escape, he immediately gave a clear shout and became one with his sword. He turned into a ray of light and suddenly rushed to the front, slashing down with his sword. The separation and reunion splitting light technique was very useful against people who didn't know the sword path, but it wasn't so easy against people like Zhao Guangwu. Therefore, he displayed his strong points and didn't play around with any exquisite moves. He just relied on his sword escape technique to be faster than the other party, not allowing him to unleash his sword force. Zhao Guangwu saw that the sword light was swift and unstoppable. If he didn't handle it well, he definitely wouldn't be able to escape. He had no choice but to stop and parry again. After dealing with it for a while, he felt the pressure increase greatly. Because Zhang Yan kept circling around him, the sword light moved and flashed, attacking from tricky places every time, making him unable to deal with it. If he continued to fight like this, he only needed to be careless and he would lose. How could he dare to take such a risk? He immediately shouted and scattered the sword pellet, turning it into 12 sword lights that forced the star's sword pellet back. Then he impatiently flew away. However, he hadn't run far when he saw a flash of light in front of him. Zhang Yan appeared in front of him again. With a long howl, he drove his sword to slash like before. When the sword light flew over, it was like a meteor chasing after the moon. The cold air overflowed and pierced into the bones, forcing Zhao Guangwu to deal with it first. After stabilizing his footing, he also knew that he had been too hasty earlier, So he didn't leave in a hurry. Instead, he attacked for a while. Zhang Yan smiled to himself, and with a wave of his sword light, he managed to block this round of attacks. When Zhao Guangwu saw that he had gained a slight upper hand, he secretly took a step back. Suddenly, he cast a spell and flew away. Zhang Yan sneered. He had long been prepared for this and executed his sword escape at almost the same time. In a few breaths' time, he caught up again and slashed down with his sword just like before. Zhao Guangwu saw that he still couldn't escape and couldn't help cursing in his heart. He had no choice but to stop again. After a few times, he also knew that it would be difficult to escape today. Although he was also a sword cultivator, he also felt annoyed by Zhang Yan's fighting style. He felt that his hands and feet were tied. He obviously had a body strength, but he couldn't use it. When the two of them fought, the sword light came and went at a rapid speed. There was no room for distraction. It was also because his previous attack was too fast that it caused him to consume too much of his vitality. At this moment, his mood suddenly fluctuated. If it was at full power, it wouldn't be considered much, but at this moment, it caused a slight gap in the sword net, and it was immediately noticed by Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's eyes suddenly flashed and he gave a low shout. The star's sword pellet instantly split into 16 sword lights. They didn't spread out, but concentrated in a narrow area to kill. Zhao Guangwu was shocked when he suddenly used this move. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and shook off the sword light. Relying on his exquisite sword skill, he was able to block it. At this time, Zhang Yan saw the opportunity and with a flick of his finger, 6 drops of serene heavy water shot out like a string of pearls. In his haste, Zhao Guangwu didn't know what it was. At this moment, the power of the sword was gone and he didn't have time to turn around to block, so he used his Dan Sha to protect himself. However, each drop of this heavy water weighed thousands of pounds. It was not something the Dan Sha could defend against in a hurry. All of them landed heavily on his chest and shoulders. In an instant, the bones in his ribs and shoulders were all shattered. He spat out a mouthful of blood and screamed. He used the last shred of consciousness he had to cast the spell to save his life. His body turned into a ray of sword light and disappeared in a flash. Target equals _blank. Chapter 319. In an elegant building in the south, the Wang sisters, Tian Kuan, and Li Guji sat behind a table. From time to time, they would comment on the people fighting below. Beside them, there were a few female attendants serving tea and water, as well as constantly serving immortal wine. After the deacon found out that they were Zhang Yan's disciples, how could he dare to ask for any benefits? He respectfully led them to this fine building. Because he was afraid that they would slow down, he would come and take a look from time to time. Every time, he would sternly order the maids to not slack off at all. Li Ji saw the deacon's change from arrogance to deference and lamented the unfairness. His master's cultivation wasn't high, so no one bothered with him. However, the Wang sisters were Zhang Yan's disciples. Even if they didn't say anything, no one dared to offend them. These few days of watching the competition between the disciples of the sect, the Wang sisters' horizons had been broadened. Only now did they realize that there were so many talented people in the sect. There were many people with talent that wasn't any worse than theirs. Now that they were a step ahead of them, if they didn't do their best to catch up, they would forever be left behind. Thus, they made up their minds to cultivate properly after returning to the sect. Wang Kaiwei saw that the deacon was scolding people on the side. From time to time, he would glance in their direction as if he was afraid that they couldn't hear him. She found it funny and stood up. "Deacon, please come and sit here. My daughter has something to ask." When the deacon heard this, he hurried over and bowed. "Junior Sister Wang, please speak. I will tell you everything I know." Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, "I still need to ask Deacon Pai. What kind of rewards will the sect have for tomorrow's Mystic Light competition?" In these 20 days, a clear Qi realm disciple called Hua Pengcheng won first place. Not only did the sect give him a true palace to cultivate in, but they also gave him a high-quality spirit artifact, a mystic art manual, and 25 bottles of supplementary pills. They also gave him access to the High Brightness Temple to listen to Tao lectures. His future could be said to be limitless. After today, it would be the battle between the mystic light realms. The deacon Taoist knew everything about the competition like the back of his hand, so he said, "I'll let the two junior sisters know. I heard that the top 60 disciples of the mystic light realm will not only be rewarded with a blessed land, but they will also be able to get a concubine from their sect. As for the top 3, not only will they be rewarded with the 3 herbs needed to condense their core, but they will also be able to choose one of the 5 arts and 3 scriptures to cultivate." The Wang sisters nodded repeatedly as they listened, but their expressions did not change. They had just entered the sect to cultivate, and their cultivation was not high enough, so they did not understand what this external medicine cultivation method meant. They thought that it was similar to what the Ming Qi disciple had bestowed, so they did not feel anything and just listened. Tian Kun was the same. He sat there quietly. At first, Li Guizhi thought that he was being arrogant. Later, he found out that he didn't like to talk, so he didn't come to provoke him. However, Li Guizhi was different from them. He interacted with far more people than the Wang sisters. His master had gone out for a period of time to search for the herbs needed to condense the core. It had been 22 to 23 years, and he had finally found all of them. Li Guizhi knew how rare these external medicines were. When he heard that the sect had bestowed such things, he couldn't help but think to himself, just a mystic light realm disciple is already so generous. If it's a core formation cultivator, they will definitely receive a lot more. Only if my cultivation increases will I be able to receive more just now. He secretly glanced at the Wang sisters. Originally, he had only approached the 2 girls because of their outstanding appearance. Everyone loved beauty, and he had not been a disciple for long, so he had not yet gotten rid of such mortal habits. But now, he no longer had such thoughts. If he wanted to cultivate, he had to have a partner, wealth, and a place. He originally thought that even though he had many people in the sect, his master wasn't bad. He didn't think that the deacon Taoist would treat him so differently from the Wang sisters. It was like a heavy blow to him. Thus, he decided to have a good relationship with these 2 sisters and see if anyone would dare to look down on him in the future. Among the disciples of the mystic light realm, the disciples of the Shenmen families are the most impressive. The Taoist deacon continued to talk non-stop, his eyebrows dancing as he spoke. But among the disciples of the master, in the past 20 years, the 2 disciples who have been promoted to the position of Elder Zhu in the Ming Temple are Wang Ziyuan and Yuan Yanhui. Wang Keting's expression changed. She had heard Lu Yenyi mention this Yuan Yanhui before. She said with surprise, "Ah, this Elder Zhu is really good at teaching disciples." When Li Guizhi heard this, he coughed. Wang Keting looked over and said, Taoist Li, what's wrong?" Li Guizhi quickly said, Nothing. I just choked on some tea." He thought to himself, Elder Yuan's skills aren't bad, but how bad can the disciples of Estate Lord Zhang be? I heard that the Wang sisters' senior sister, Lu Yenyi, has only cultivated for 20 years and has already entered the mystic light realm. She's already famous. If I had a choice, I would be willing to become Estate Lord Zhang's disciple. Elder Yuan has already lived for over 500 years. In a few more decades, his lifespan will be up. Without someone to rely on, how far can Yuan and Wen go, no matter how talented they are? When Wang Kaiwei heard Yuan Yanhui's name, she couldn't help but say, I wonder if eldest senior sister can beat this person this time. Wang Keting's eyes shifted. She nudged Tian Kun, who hadn't spoken for a long time, and said, Second senior brother, what do you think? Tian Kun thought about it seriously and said, Eldest senior sister has followed master for the longest time and has the sword pill. I think she won't be too bad. Wang Keting pouted unhappily. Didn't that mean she didn't say anything? Right at this moment, a clear, profound light flew over from the sky and circled around the mountain wall a few times, as if it was looking for someone. Wang Keting's eyes were sharp, and she saw it at a glance. She said happily, It's eldest senior sister. She jumped up and waved her hand, shouting, Eldest senior sister, I'm waiting here. The ray of light turned and flew over. When it reached the pavilion, the light dissipated and Lu Yenyi walked out. Her appearance was elegant and elegant. She wore a deep pink robe with long sleeves that dragged on the ground and golden rings around her waist. The rings made a light sound as she walked, and the light under her knees hadn't dissipated yet. When she walked in from the pavilion, the bright moon behind her made her look like a fairy that had descended to the mortal world. Li Guizhi was stunned. The Wang sisters and Tian Kun quickly stood up and bowed. "Greetings, eldest senior sister." Lu Yenny opened her red lips and said gently, "Junior brother Tian, junior sisters, no need to be so polite." She turned her eyes again, looking at Li Guizhi, saying, "I wonder who this is." Li Guizhi just now came back to his senses. He quickly tidied up his clothes and bowed. "I am immortal Ing Island's Li Guizhi." "Greetings, Fairy Lu." Immortal Ing Island. Lu Yenny's eyes flashed with a trace of reminiscence as she nodded. At this time, in a pavilion not far from them, there were two Taoists drinking wine and enjoying themselves. One of the Taoists with a tall crown was already drunk. When he saw Lu Yenny's flight light, he asked a short cultivator, "Junior martial brother Wang, look at that female cultivator. Her mystic light is so pure and rare. Do you know where she came from?" The short cultivator took a look and said nonchalantly, "From her appearance, she should be Lu Yenny. Her talent is high, it's normal for her to have such achievements." The Taoist frowned and put down his wine cup. "Is she the Lu Yenny that junior nephew Yuan mentioned? The one that almost stole her sword pellet on Ing Luo Island?" The short cultivator nodded. "That's right, that's her." The Taoist with a high crown rolled his eyes and pushed his cup away with the help of his drunkenness. He stood up and said, "I heard that this woman is still unconvinced that the sword pill was taken away by martial nephew Yuan. Since I have nothing to do, let me go and kill her spirit." The short cultivator knew that this senior brother of his loved to cause trouble. Because he was afraid that someone would take his life, he was chased out of the sect for many years. He didn't expect that just now, not long after he returned, he would return to his old ways. He hurriedly grabbed his wrist and said solemnly, "Senior brother Bao, you can't, this woman is Zhang." Before he could finish, the Taoist shook his hand off and said impatiently, "Don't try to stop me." The short cultivator saw that the situation wasn't good. He looked at the 10 or so empty wine jars beside him and stomped his feet, saying, "Drinking is a hindrance." The two pavilions weren't far from each other. He turned into a rainbow and landed on the red railing. He shook his sleeves and placed them on his waist. He scanned the room fiercely and said deliberately, "Let me ask you, which one is Lu Yenny?" Lu Yenny just now sat down. Seeing that the Taoist's tone wasn't friendly and he reeked of alcohol, she stood up and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "It's my daughter. What brings you here, Taoist?" The Taoist with the high crown sized her up and chuckled, "I've heard people say that you're one of the best among the younger generation. Today, my hands are itching. Come, let's have a spar. Let's see how good you are." Lu Yenny frowned slightly and shook her head, saying, "This Taoist, forgive me for not being able to comply." The Taoist was stunned. His shoulders trembled and he laughed out loud, saying, "What, are you afraid? Don't worry, I can spare you a few moves. Just come at me, I won't harm your life." Lu Yenny's eyes were clear and she said, "I'm afraid that Taoist has misunderstood. The competition is in a day's time. If Taoist wants to fight with my daughter, it's not too late to do so during the competition. I won't back down. However, it's inappropriate today and I won't accept the challenge. Taoist, please go back." The Taoist's expression changed when he heard this, but he said rudely, "No, since I'm here, I won't leave so easily. You have to agree, even if you don't want to." But just as he finished speaking, a wisp of smoke flew over and wrapped around his waist. He didn't know what was going on and angrily said, "Which scoundrel dares to capture your Taoist grandpa?" The person who caught him frowned and scolded, "Junior martial brother, stop talking. Don't think that with the celestial master's words, I, Darren, can't deal with you." When the Taoist heard this voice, he couldn't help but tremble. He immediately became obedient and didn't dare to speak anymore. Lu Yenny looked up and saw that the person who attacked was a person from Darren with a head full of white hair. He had a goatee and a thin face. He wore a rainbow-colored robe and sat on the flying couch. There were 2 disciples behind him. At this moment, he also turned around and looked at Lu Yeni. He said in a deep voice, "Are you Lu Yeni?" Chapter 320. This Daoren had a serious demeanor, and his aura was thick and powerful. As he sat there, everyone in the room felt suffocated. Lu Yeni did not know this person's identity, so she replied cautiously, "I am Lu Yin. How should I address you?" One of the disciples behind the old Taoist stood up and shouted, "How dare you? This is the elder of Shangming Temple. Hurry up and greet him." Lu Yeni did not move. She smiled and said, "It is not difficult for me to greet him. My master is Chancellor Zhou of Danding Courtyard. May I ask how I should address you and my master?" The old Taoist frowned slightly. Zhou Changju was 2 generations older than him. If that was the case, wouldn't Lu Yeni have to be the same generation as him? How could that be? Therefore, he changed the topic and said, "A great teacher produces a great disciple. My disciple, Yan Hui, often mentions you in front of me, Daoren. Seeing you today, you are indeed extraordinary." Lu Yeni's heart skipped a beat and she asked, "Is it Elder Zhu?" Daoren nodded slightly. Lu Yeni bowed and said, "So it is Elder Zhu. Yeni greets you." Although Elder Zhu was not well known in the sect before, he gradually became known after his 2 disciples, Wang Zhiyuan and Yuan Yen, showed their outstanding talents one after another. The reason why he was here was because he had received a report that his good-for-nothing junior brother had come to cause trouble for Zhang Yan's disciple. Fearing that a conflict would arise, he had rushed here in a hurry. Fortunately, he had arrived in time to put a stop to the matter so that it would not cause any trouble in the future. He had also heard of Zhang Yan's past. He was quite fearful of him. It should be known that Zhang Yan's core had reached the 1st grade. As long as there were no accidents, he would most likely enter the Yuanying realm. He was now 562 years old, and his lifespan was coming to an end. It could be imagined that if he offended Zhang Yan for no reason, he could still handle it now. But if he left in another 20 or 30 years, the 2 disciples he left behind would be in trouble. Not only that, he always hoped that after he reincarnated, he would have the opportunity to enter the celestial sect of wonders to recultivate. If his disciple couldn't even take care of himself, how would he have the leisure to care about his affairs? Thus, he'd stopped paying attention to his cultivation in the last few tens of years, and he'd placed all his energy on his 2 disciples. If it was possible, he still wanted to help them find all the medicines needed to condense the core and help the 2 of them reach the core transformation stage before his lifespan ended. With this thought in mind, he naturally didn't want any accidents to happen during this period. After chatting with Lu Yeni for a while, he couldn't help but praise her in his heart when he saw that she had a calm expression and answered fluently, just like a disciple of a famous sect. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.